I took the warehouse camera in to get it checked. The technician suddenly froze his face, turning deathly pale. Trembling, he shouted, "Leave this place immediately." But I stepped closer to the screen anyway, and what appeared before my eyes made my heart stop and my blood run ice cold. I am Moses Carter, 71 years old, and to the world, I am just Mo, the old man with the gray beard and the limp who sweeps the loading docks, the invisible janitor who lives in the rundown shack behind the main warehouse. People look right through me like I am part of the scenery, like an old, rusted forklift that nobody bothered to haul away. My son-in-law Gavin loves to remind me of my place. He calls me Pops with that condescending smile of his, always speaking loud and slow like I am half deaf or half stupid. He tells his fancy friends that he lets me stay on the property out of charity because I have nowhere else to go. He has no idea. He has no idea that the concrete under his Italian leather shoes belongs to me. He has no idea that the Carter Logistics sign on the main gate bears my name, not some corporate entity. He has no idea that for 40 years I built this empire with these two calloused hands, starting with one beat-up delivery truck and a dream to leave something behind for my daughter Keisha. I hide my ownership behind a shell company because I learned a long time ago that in this business, silence is power, and being underestimated is the greatest weapon a man can have. I wanted to see if Gavin loved my daughter for who she was or for what he thought she could inherit. I got my answer on a rainy Tuesday inside a small electronics repair shop in downtown Atlanta. I had brought in one of the hidden security cameras from the south perimeter of the warehouse. It had been acting up, glitching out every few days, and I needed to know if it was a wiring issue or something else. The technician was a young man named Davis, a good kid I had known for years. He usually greeted me with a smile and asked about my vegetable garden. But today was different. When he plugged the memory card into his computer, his smile vanished instantly. His eyes went wide, and I saw the blood drain from his face, leaving him looking sick. He pulled his hands away from the keyboard as if it were burning hot. "Mo, you need to take this and go," Davis whispered, his voice shaking. "You need to leave right now. I cannot be involved in this. I do not want to know what this is." I frowned, leaning on my cane. "What are you talking about, Davis? It is just footage of the loading dock. Maybe a raccoon got into the trash again." No, Davis stood up, knocking his chair back. He looked terrified, glancing at the front door as if he expected a hit squad to burst in. "This is not raccoons, Mo. This is... You need to see this, but you cannot see it here. Please, just take it and go." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I moved around the counter. My limp disappeared for a second, replaced by the stride of the man I used to be, the man who stared down union busters in the 80s. "Show me," I commanded. My voice was low, but it had a weight to it that made Davis freeze. He hesitated, then slowly turned the monitor toward me. The timestamp on the video was from 3 nights ago, 2 in the morning. The warehouse was supposed to be empty. The security lights were dim, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. A black luxury SUV pulled up to the loading bay. I recognized the car immediately. It was the new Range Rover Gavin had bought last month, claiming his real estate business was booming. The driver door opened, and out stepped Gavin. Even in the grainy night vision, I could see the arrogance in his walk. He was wearing that expensive trench coat he liked to show off, the one he said cost more than my entire wardrobe. But he was not alone. 2 other men stepped out of the back seat. They were not business partners. I know the look of business partners. These men moved like predators. One was carrying a heavy duffel bag. The other was holding blueprints. I leaned closer to the screen, squinting. I knew every inch of that warehouse. I knew where the ventilation shafts were. I knew where the main power grid connected. And I watched in horror as Gavin led these men straight to the main electrical panel in the east wing. "Turn the sound up," I told Davis. He did. The audio was crackly but clear enough. "This is the spot," one of the men said, pointing at the breaker box. "We rig it here. It looks like a classic electrical fault. Old wiring, overloaded circuits. The insurance investigator will not look twice, especially with a building this age." I felt my grip tighten on my cane until my knuckles turned white. They were planning to burn it down. My warehouse. My life is work. The legacy I built for my daughter. Gavin laughed. It was a cold, cruel sound. "Make sure it is thorough. I need the structure compromised enough that the city condemns the rest of it. The land is worth $5 million if the building is gone. I have a buyer lined up who wants a clean slate for condos. $5 million. He was going to burn down a $50 million logistics hub for a quick $5 million payout. The ignorance was staggering, but the greed was worse. But the video was not over. One of the men, the one with the duffel bag, gestured toward the small wooden structure visible through the loading bay doors. It was my house. The caretaker's shack where I had been living for the past 5 years, playing the role of the poor father-in-law. "What about the shack?" the man asked. "There is a light on. Is the old man home?" I stopped breathing. In the video, Gavin turned and looked directly at my house. I could see his face clearly now, illuminated by the harsh security light. There was no hesitation, no conflict, no humanity. No. "Yeah, the old man is there," Gavin said casually, as if discussing a pest problem. "He sleeps like the dead. He is practically a vegetable anyway." "We cannot risk it," the man said. "If he is inside, that is a body count. That changes the charge from arson to murder 1 if we get caught." Gavin shrugged. A simple shrug that shattered whatever hope I had left for my family. "Let it burn," he said. His voice was steady. "If the fire spreads to the shack, so be it. It is an accident, right? Besides, if he goes with the building, it saves me the monthly cost of a nursing home. Keisha is too soft to put him away, but if nature takes its course, well, it solves 2 problems with 1 match." The video ended. The screen went black. The silence in the repair shop was deafening. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the back room. I could hear the traffic outside on the street. But mostly I could hear the sound of my own heart breaking into 1,000 pieces. It wasn't just greed. It was hate. Pure, unadulterated hate. I had spent 5 years tolerating Gavin's insults. I let him treat me like a servant in my own kingdom. I let him mock my clothes, my education, and my history because I thought he made Keisha happy. I thought that underneath his arrogant exterior there might be a man who loved his family. I was wrong. He was not a man. He was a monster who was willing to incinerate me to save a few $1,000s in nursing home fees. Davis was looking at me with pity now. "Mo, I am so sorry," he whispered. "I won't say a word. Just take the card." I reached out and took the memory card. My hand did not shake. The shock was fading, replaced by a cold, hard rage that I hadn't felt since I fought my way out of the projects in '68. "Thank you, Davis," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Calm, too calm, like the eye of a storm. I walked out of the shop and into the bright sunlight of the Atlanta afternoon. The city was moving around me, busy and loud, but I felt completely alone. I sat on a bench near the bus stop and looked at the tiny piece of plastic in my hand. This was it. This was the end of Moses the janitor. This was the end of the quiet old man who sat on the porch and whittled wood while his son-in-law insulted him. Gavin wanted a fire. He wanted to burn everything down to get what he wanted. Well, he was going to get a fire. But not the one he planned. I checked my watch. It was 4 in the afternoon. Gavin and Keisha were expecting me for dinner tonight. Gavin had told me this morning with a fake smile that he had a surprise for me. He probably wanted to butter me up before he lit the match. Or maybe he wanted to check if I was healthy enough to die in a fire without raising suspicion. I stood up and hailed a cab. I was not going to the police. Not yet. The police would arrest him, and that would be too easy. That would be too quick. Gavin needed to learn a lesson. He needed to understand that you do not judge a book by its worn-out cover, and you certainly do not try to burn a man who has walked through hell and came out smiling. He wanted to sell my land. He wanted to erase my legacy. He wanted to turn my bones into ash. I got into the cab and gave the driver my address. "Take me home," I said. The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror. "You okay, Pops? You look like you just seen a ghost." I looked out the window as the city skyline passed by. The tall glass buildings, the busy streets, the world that belonged to men like Gavin. Or so they thought. "No, son," I said quietly. "I did not see a ghost. But someone else is about to." As we drove toward the warehouse district, I formulated a plan. It would not be quick. It would be painful. I would let Gavin think he was winning. I would let him climb higher and higher up his ladder of lies until he thought he touched the sky. I would let him sign the papers. I would let him invite his rich friends. I would let him think he was the king of the world. And then when he looked down, I would show him that the ladder was standing on my back. The cab pulled up to the main gate of Carter Logistics. I saw Gavin's car parked near my shack. He was standing there talking to Keisha, pointing at the main warehouse, gesturing with his hands. Planning. Plotting. I paid the driver and stepped out. I hunched my shoulders slightly, forcing a limp into my step, masking the strength in my legs. I put on the mask of the confused old man one last time. "Hey, Mo," Gavin called out when he saw me. His voice was bright and cheerful. "Where have you been, old-timer? We were getting worried. We thought maybe you got lost on the way to the store." Keisha looked at me with concern, but she stayed silent, standing in her husband's shadow as always. I gripped the memory card in my pocket. It felt hot against my skin. "I just went for a walk, Gavin," I mumbled, looking at the ground, just clearing my head. "Well, come on inside," Gavin said, clapping his hands together. "We made pot roast, and we have some things to talk about. Big things, Mo. Changes are coming." He winked at me. A predator playing with his food. I looked up at him and gave him a weak, toothless smile. "I sure am hungry, Gavin," I said. "I hope you made enough." "Oh, we made plenty." He laughed, guiding me toward the house with a hand on my shoulder. That hand felt heavy like a shackle, but he didn't notice that my shoulder didn't sag under the weight. We walked into the house, into the trap he thought he had set for me. But as I crossed the threshold, I knew the truth. He wasn't locking me in with him. He was locking himself in with me. And the fire he wanted so badly, it was already burning. It was burning right behind my eyes. I pushed open the heavy wooden door of my caretaker shack, and the smell of roasted beef hit me instantly, masking the scent of old timber and dust that usually filled my home. It was a smell that should have been welcoming, a smell of family and comfort, but tonight it smelled like a bribe. Surprise. Gavin shouted the word like he was announcing a game show winner. He was standing by my small kitchen table, holding a bottle of wine that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. Keisha was at the stove, her back to me, stirring a pot. She turned around and gave me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, a smile that looked tired and strained. "Welcome home, Daddy," Keisha said, wiping her hands on her apron. "We wanted to do something special for you. Just because." Just because. That was a phrase people used when they wanted something. I shuffled into the room, leaning heavily on my cane, playing the part of the weary old man they expected to see. My heart was still pounding from what I had seen on that videotape just an hour ago, but I forced my face to remain blank, a canvas of senile confusion. "What is the occasion?" I asked, my voice raspy. "Is it a holiday? Did I forget a holiday again?" Gavin laughed, walking over to pour wine into 3 glasses, even though he knew I had not touched alcohol since my wife passed 10 years ago. "No, Mo, no holiday," Gavin said, flashing that bright, predatory smile. "We just appreciate you. We know how hard it is for you out here all alone in this old shack. We wanted to spoil you a little bit." He pulled out a chair for me. "Sit down, Mo. Take a load off those tired legs." I sat down. The chair creaked under my weight. The table was set with my good plates, the ones with the gold rim that I only used for Christmas. In the center of the table sat a gift box wrapped in shiny silver paper. Gavin sat opposite me and pushed the box toward me. "Go ahead, open it. It is just a little something I picked up. I saw them and thought of you immediately." I reached out with trembling hands. I unwrapped the paper, slowly tearing it bit by bit while Gavin tapped his fingers impatiently on the table. Inside the box was a pair of brown leather loafers. They looked expensive. They also looked familiar. I lifted one shoe out of the box. There on the side near the heel was a distinct scuff mark, a scratch in the leather that someone had tried to polish over but failed to hide. I recognized these shoes. Gavin had worn them to Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago. He had complained then that they were too tight and pinched his toes. Now here they were, wrapped in silver paper, presented to me as a gift. "These are Italian leather," Mo, Gavin said, leaning back, looking satisfied with his own generosity. "Top of the line. You cannot walk around in those old work boots anymore. A man of your age needs comfort." I looked at the used shoes. He was giving me his cast-offs, his garbage, and expecting me to be grateful. He thought so little of me that he believed I wouldn't notice they were worn. "Thank you, Gavin," I said, keeping my head down so he couldn't see the fire in my eyes. "These are mighty fine." "Too fine for a man like me." "Nonsense." Gavin waved his hand dismissively. "Nothing is too good for family. Try them on later. Now let's eat." Keisha served the roast. It was delicious, tender, and savory, but it tasted like ash in my mouth. We ate in silence for a few minutes, the only sound being the scraping of silverware on china. I could feel Gavin watching me, waiting for the right moment to spring his trap. "You know, Mo." Gavin started wiping his mouth with a napkin. "I was talking to some of the guys downtown today. They say the crime rate in this district is skyrocketing. Just last week they found a body 2 blocks over. Gang violence." Keisha looked up alarmed. "Really, Gavin? You didn't tell me that." "I didn't want to scare you, babe," Gavin said, his voice dripping with fake concern. "But it is getting dangerous, especially for an elderly man living alone in a warehouse district. This isn't a place for people like Mo anymore." I chewed slowly. I knew for a fact that the crime rate in this district was the lowest it had been in 20 years because I paid for private security patrols that Gavin didn't know about. But I let him talk. "It is scary out here at night," I mumbled. "Sometimes I hear noises." "Exactly." Gavin slammed his hand on the table, making the wine glasses jump. "Noises, gangs, fires. It is a tinderbox, Mo. And look, I know you love this place. I know you spent your life driving trucks and sleeping in cabins, and you are used to the rough life. But you are 71 now. You are not the young buck who used to haul freight across the state line." He paused, taking a sip of wine. "You were a truck driver, Mo. A blue-collar man. You worked with your hands. You didn't have the time or the education to understand how complex the world is getting. Property laws, zoning regulations, liability insurance. It is a headache even for a businessman like me. For someone with your background, it must be overwhelming." There it was, the insult wrapped in a compliment. He was reminding me that I was uneducated, that I was just a driver. He thought my brain was as calloused as my hands. He didn't know that while I was driving those trucks, I was listening to audiobooks on economics. He didn't know I spent my nights in motel rooms studying real estate law. "I just do my job, Gavin," I said softly. "I keep the gates locked. I sweep the floors." "And you do a great job," Gavin said quickly. "But the owners of this land, the Carter Logistics Corporation, they are looking to make changes. Big changes. They want to redevelop. And they want to make sure the caretaker is taken care of." He reached into his jacket pocket. My heart rate picked up. This was it. He pulled out a folded document and a sleek black pen. He smoothed the paper out on the table next to the pot roast. "What is this?" I asked, squinting at the paper even though I could read the bold letters perfectly upside down. "Relocation and asset liquidation consent. It is just some paperwork." Mo, Gavin said, his voice becoming smooth and persuasive like a snake charmer. "Since you are the registered caretaker and the only person living on the premises, the company needs your signature to approve the redevelopment plan. It basically says you agree to move to a much nicer facility, a senior living community that Keisha and I have picked out for you. And it gives me authorization to handle the transition of the property assets so you don't have to deal with the stress." He was lying through his teeth. He didn't know I owned the company. He thought I was just the registered agent, the man whose name was on the deed as a placeholder for some anonymous board of directors. He thought if he got my signature, he could use his power of attorney to sell the land out from under the non-existent board. He was trying to steal my company by tricking the janitor. But Daddy Keisha spoke up, her voice trembling. "You said it was just a safety inspection form. You didn't say it was for him to move out." Gavin shot her a sharp look, a look that said, "Shut up." "It is for his safety, babe," he said through gritted teeth. "We talked about this. The fire risk, remember. If he signs this, we can get him into Shady Pines by the weekend. They have a bed open. It is a Palace Mo. Bingo nights, heated pool nurses around the clock." He uncapped the pen and held it out to me. "Just sign right here on the dotted line, Mo, right above where it says Authorized Representative. I will handle the rest. I will talk to the big bosses at Carter Logistics and make sure you get a nice severance package. Leave the heavy lifting to the guys with the business degrees, right?" I looked at the pen. Then I looked at Gavin. He was practically vibrating with greed. He saw $5 million sitting at this table, not a human being. I reached for the pen. My hand was shaking. I made sure it shook violently. I let my tremors rattle the silverware. I don't know, Gavin," I stammered. "My eyes aren't so good tonight. The letters are swimming." "Just sign your name," Mo, Gavin urged, pushing the paper closer. "Just an X will do if you can't write it out. Just sign it so we can keep you safe." I took the pen. I brought the tip down toward the paper. Gavin stopped breathing. He was leaning forward, his eyes wide, fixed on the paper. I let out a groan of pain and clutched my chest with my left hand while my right hand, the one holding the pen, flailed wildly. "Oh, my heart," I gasped. In my flailing, I knocked over my full glass of red wine. The glass shattered against the edge of the table. The dark red liquid exploded outward, splashing across the white tablecloth, the roast beef, and most importantly, the document. No, Gavin screamed. The wine soaked into the paper, instantly turning the white page into a soggy crimson mess. The ink started to bleed. The signature line dissolved. I dropped the pen and slumped back in my chair, breathing heavily, feigning a spell. "Oh, Lord, I am sorry," I wheezed. "My hand, it just jumped. I am so clumsy." Gavin snatched the soggy paper up, wine dripping from it, onto his expensive pants. He looked at the ruined document, then at me. His face turned a shade of purple that matched the wine. The mask of the loving son-in-law slipped completely. For a second, I saw the real Gavin, the man from the videotape. His eyes were full of murder. He leaned across the table, getting right in my face, ignoring his crying wife who was trying to clean up the glass. He lowered his voice to a hiss, a sound only I could hear. "You stupid, useless old man," he whispered, venom dripping from every word. "You can't even hold a pen. You are a waste of space. Do you hear me? A waste of space!" Gavin Keisha cried out. "Stop it! He is having an episode." "He is not having an episode. He is ruining everything," Gavin snapped, standing up and throwing the soggy paper ball onto the floor. He looked at me with pure disgust. "Don't worry, Mo," he said, his voice loud and fake again but shaking with rage. "We can print another copy. We will do this tomorrow, and you will sign it, even if I have to guide your hand myself." I looked up at him, my eyes wide and watery, playing the terrified victim. "I am sorry, Gavin," I whispered. "I am just a useless old man." "You got that right," he muttered, turning his back on me to storm out of the kitchen. I watched him go. I looked at the red stain spreading across the table like blood. "You think I am useless, Gavin," I thought to myself as Keisha fussed over me, apologizing for her husband's temper. "You think I am weak." I looked down at the new shoes he had given me, the used shoes with the scuff marks. "Tomorrow you are going to bring another paper. But tomorrow I will be ready. You want to play games with the janitor's son, you are about to find out that the janitor owns the keys to the whole building, and I am about to lock you in." The sun rose over Atlanta with a heavy, humid heat that promised a storm, but inside my chest, the storm was already raging. I stood by the window of my shack, watching the morning light hit the corrugated metal of the main warehouse. My warehouse, the empire I had built from sweat and diesel fumes. Today, however, I was not the king. Today, I was the jester in a court of thieves. Gavin arrived at 9 sharp. He did not come alone. A convoy of 3 black sedans rolled through the gates, kicking up dust that settled on my hydrangeas. Men in sharp suits stepped out. They wore sunglasses despite the overcast sky, and they moved with the swagger of men who thought they owned the world. But I knew their type. I had dealt with them in the 80s. They were not investors. They were vultures. They were the kind of men who stripped companies for parts and left the workers to starve. I stepped out onto my porch wearing my faded gray uniform, the one with the name patch that was peeling at the corners. I leaned heavily on my cane, letting my mouth hang open slightly. The transformation was complete. Moses, the CEO, was gone. Mo, the senile janitor, had taken the stage. "Hey, Pops," Gavin shouted as he approached. His voice was too loud, the way you speak to a child or a dog. "Look alive. We have VIPs today." He turned to the men behind him. "Gentlemen, this is Mo. He is part of the property fixtures, you could say. Been here since the Jurassic period, right, Mo?" The men laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. "Does he talk?" one of them asked, eyeing me with distaste. He was a tall man with a scar near his lip. Barely Gavin sneered. "He is mostly deaf, and his mind is... well, let's just say the elevator does not go to the top floor anymore. But he is harmless. Just keep him away from the important paperwork, right, Mo?" I nodded slowly, giving them a vacant smile. "Good morning, sirs," I mumbled. "Nice cars. Very shiny." Gavin rolled his eyes. Yeah, Mo. Listen, we are going to use the main conference room. I need you to bring coffee. And make sure it is fresh this time. None of that mud you drink." I shuffled toward the main building, my heart hammering against my ribs. The main conference room. That room had my name on the plaque behind the door, hidden under a layer of paint Gavin had applied last year. That was where I signed the deal with Amazon in '99. That was where I negotiated the union contracts that gave my drivers full benefits. Now I was being sent there to fetch drinks. I walked into the break room. Sarah, the dispatcher, was there. She had been with me for 15 years. She looked at me, her eyes full of sadness. "Mr. Carter," she whispered, using my real title. "You do not have to do this. I can take the coffee in." I shook my head, putting a finger to my lips. "No, Sarah. Let the old man work. They need to see the show." I prepared the tray. A silver pot, 5 ceramic cups sugar cream, and 1 extra ingredient. Taped securely to the bottom of the sugar bowl was a small, high-definition voice recorder. It was a sleek black device no bigger than a stick of gum. I had bought it years ago to record my memoirs, but today it would record my vindication. I carried the tray into the conference room. The men were already seated around the mahogany table, my table. They had their feet up on the leather chairs. Gavin was at the head of the table, sitting in the chair that used to be mine. Seeing him there sent a spike of adrenaline through my veins that almost made me drop the tray for real. "Coffee, gentlemen," I said, my voice trembling just the right amount. "Just put it down and get out," Gavin snapped. He was trying to impress them with his dominance. "Look how I control the help," his posture said. I placed the tray in the center of the table. I made sure the sugar bowl was positioned perfectly facing Gavin. As I turned to leave, the man with the scar spoke up. "Hey, old-timer, come here." I stopped and turned. "Yes, sir." "You stepped on my shoe," the man said, pointing to his polished alligator skin loafer. There was a tiny smudge of dust on the toe. I did not touch him. I had been nowhere near him. It was a power play, a test. "I am sorry, sir," I said. "My eyes are bad." "Well, do not just stand there, apologize," the man said, kicking his foot out. "Clean it off." The room went silent. Even Gavin looked uncomfortable for a second, but he recovered quickly. He could not look weak in front of the money men. "You heard him," Mo Gavin said, his voice tight. "Be a good host. Help Mr. Vargo with his shoe." I looked at Gavin. I looked at the man. I looked at the other men watching with amused smirks. This was the moment. This was the line. If I knelt, I lost my dignity. If I refused, I blew my cover. I thought about Keisha. I thought about the fire they planned to set. I thought about the legacy I was fighting for. Slowly, painfully, I lowered myself to one knee. My joints popped loudly in the silence. I pulled a rag from my back pocket. "I am sorry, sir," I whispered. "Let me get that for you." I wiped the dust from his shoe. I buffed the leather until it shone. I felt the heat of humiliation rising up my neck, burning my ears. I felt the ghost of my father, who had been a sharecropper, watching me. But I also felt a cold, steely resolve hardening in my gut. "Good boy," the man laughed, tossing a nickel onto the floor next to me. "Keep the change." I picked up the nickel. I stood up, using the table for support. I looked at Gavin one last time. He would not meet my eyes. He was looking at his papers, ashamed of what he was allowing, but too greedy to stop it. "Thank you, sir," I said. I will just go check the perimeter." I shuffled out of this room, closing the heavy oak door behind me. As soon as the latch clicked, I dropped the act. I moved quickly down the hall into the janitor closet. I locked the door and pulled out my smartphone. I had paired the recorder to my phone via Bluetooth. I put my earbuds in and tapped the screen. The audio feed came through crystal clear. God, that was pathetic. The scarred man laughed. "Is that really the father-in-law?" "Yeah, that is him." Gavin's voice came through. "Sad, right? He used to run this place, apparently. Now he is just a relic." "So about the timeline," the man asked. "We need this land cleared by next month. The condos are pre-sold. We cannot have delays." "Do not worry," Gavin said. "I am working on him. I tried the nice approach last night. Gave him some shoes, tried to get him to sign the relocation papers. He spilled wine all over it. Clumsy idiot. And if he does not sign," the man asked. There was a pause. I held my breath in the dark closet. "If he does not sign," Gavin said, his voice dropping lower, but the recorder picked up every syllable. "Then we go with plan B, the electrical fire. We talked about that," the man said. "But what about the girl? Your wife? She is the heir, right? If the old man dies without signing, she gets everything. Will she sell?" Gavin laughed. That was the sound that chilled me the most. "That confident, arrogant laugh," Gavin said. "Keisha does what I tell her to do. I have spent 5 years molding her. She is weak. She thinks she cannot breathe without me. If the old man disappears, she will be devastated, sure. But I will be the shoulder she cries on. I will tell her the memories are too painful. I will tell her we need to sell the land to move on. She will sign whatever I put in front of her. I gripped the mop handle so hard the wood splintered. He wasn't just stealing my money, he was stealing my daughter's soul. He had broken her spirit just so he could cash a check. Besides, Gavin continued, I have some leverage, I have photos, doctored obviously, but she does not know that. Photos that would make her lose custody of our imaginary future kids if she ever tries to leave me. I own her, just like I own this warehouse. I pulled the earbuds out. I could not listen anymore. I had heard enough. I stood in the darkness of the closet surrounded by bottles of bleach and ammonia. I looked at the nickel the man had thrown at me. I squeezed it in my fist until it bit into my palm. They thought I was a Trojan horse, a hollow statue they could wheel out to amuse themselves. But they forgot what was inside the horse. They forgot that inside the hollow shell there were soldiers waiting with swords drawn. You want to own my daughter, Gavin, I whispered to the empty room. You want to burn my house. I put the nickel in my pocket next to the memory card from the camera. You made me kneel today, son. You made me wipe the dirt from a thief's shoe. But you should have looked closer at the floor while I was down there, because while I was kneeling, I was digging your grave. I unlocked the closet door. I stepped out into the hallway. I did not shuffle this time. I walked. I walked with the rhythm of a man who had marched for civil rights in the 60s. I walked with the rhythm of a CEO who had crushed competitors in the 90s. I walked toward my office, my real office, the one hidden in the basement behind the boiler room, the one Gavin didn't even know existed. It was time to make a phone call. It was time to unleash the soldiers. The smell of gas is something you never forget. It is heavy and thick, a scent that crawls up your nose and settles in the back of your throat like a warning from the devil himself. I woke up to that smell choking the air in my small shack. It was 2 a.m. and the silence of the warehouse district was broken by the sound of screaming. It was my daughter Keisha screaming. I threw off my thin blanket and grabbed my cane, ignoring the ache in my knees. I moved as fast as my 71-year-old legs would carry me, not toward the door, but toward the kitchen of the main house where Keisha and Gavin lived. The back door was unlocked. It was always unlocked these days because Gavin wanted me to have easy access so I could clean their messes, but tonight it felt like an invitation to a crime scene. Daddy, Keisha was sobbing. Oh my God. Daddy, I burst into their kitchen. The lights were blindingly bright. Keisha was huddled in the corner wearing her silk robe, her hands covering her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. Gavin was standing by the stove, a towel in his hand, acting the part of the hero. He twisted the knobs on the gas range, violently shutting them off. The hissing sound died, but the smell was strong enough to make my eyes water. You are trying to kill us, Gavin shouted, spinning around to face me. His face was red, his veins popping out of his neck. You crazy old man, you left all 4 burners on. I stood there leaning on my cane, my chest heaving. I looked at the stove. I looked at the burners. I did not cook tonight, Gavin, I said calmly, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. I ate a cold sandwich in my shack. I haven't touched this stove in 2 days. Liar. Gavin stepped forward, pointing a finger in my face. I saw you. I saw you wandering around the yard at midnight. You came in here to make tea, and you forgot. Just like you forgot to lock the gate last week. Just like you forgot where you put your keys. You are losing your mind, Mo, and you are taking us down with you. He was performing. I knew it. He knew it. But Keisha didn't know it. She looked at me, and for the first time in her life I saw fear in her eyes. Not fear for me, but fear of me. Daddy, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Is it true? Did you come in here? I looked at my daughter, my beautiful, smart Keisha. The girl who used to run this warehouse floor with a clipboard when she was 10, pretending to be the boss. The girl who graduated with honors. How had she become this trembling bird trapped in a cage of Gavin's making baby? I said softly, stepping toward her. You know me. I don't forget things. I didn't come in here. But Gavin was already there, standing between us, a wall of false protection. He doesn't know Keisha. Gavin said, his voice dropping to that smooth, manipulative tone he used so well. That is the thing about dementia, babe. The patient doesn't know they are doing it. He thinks he was in his shack, but his brain is misfiring. He was sleepwalking. He turned the gas on and walked away. If I hadn't come down for a glass of water, we would be dead right now. Explosion. Fire. Gone. He looked at me over Keisha's shoulder, and his eyes were cold and dead. He winked. A tiny, almost imperceptible wink. He had turned the gas on himself. He had risked blowing up his own wife just to frame me. The realization hit me harder than any physical blow. This man wasn't just a thief. He was a sociopath. Keisha buried her face in Gavin's chest, sobbing uncontrollably. "I can't do this, Gavin. I can't handle this." "I know, baby. I know," Gavin cooed, stroking her hair while staring me down. "We have to make a decision. For his safety. And for ours." I turned and walked out. There was no point in arguing. In the court of Gavin's lies, I was already guilty. The next morning, the air in the warehouse felt heavy and humid. I was sweeping the loading dock, moving the broom back and forth in a rhythmic trance, trying to calm the rage that was boiling in my gut. "Daddy!" I stopped sweeping. Keisha was standing there. She looked terrible. Her eyes were puffy, and red, dark circles bruised the skin beneath them. She wasn't wearing her usual business suit. She was wearing sweatpants and an old t-shirt, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. I leaned my broom against the wall. "Morning, baby girl." She didn't return the greeting. She walked over and took my hand. Her hands were cold. "We need to talk," she said, her voice cracking. "About last night." I sighed. "Keisha, I didn't turn that stove on. You have to believe me." She squeezed my hand hard, desperate. "I want to believe you, Daddy. I really do." But Gavin showed me the security log. The back door sensor tripped at midnight. Someone came in. Of course the sensor tripped. Gavin probably tripped it himself or hacked the log. He was tech-savvy enough to doctor a timestamp. Daddy, Keisha continued, tears welling up again. Gavin says you have Alzheimer's. He says it is early onset, but it is aggressive. The forgetting, the confusion, the wandering at night. I looked at her. I wanted to shake her by the shoulders. I wanted to scream, "The only thing I am confused about is why you married this snake." I wanted to take her to the basement safe, pulling out the deeds and the bank accounts, and show her that her senile father was actually the CEO of the company she worked for. I wanted to tell her that she was an heiress worth millions, and she could kick Gavin to the curb within the hour. I opened my mouth to speak. The truth was on the tip of my tongue. But then I saw him. Gavin was watching us from the second-floor office window. He was watching like a hawk, waiting for a mouse to move. If I told her the truth now in this fragile state, what would happen? She would run to him. She would say, "Gavin, Daddy says he owns the company. Daddy says he is a millionaire." And Gavin would laugh. He would look at her with that pitying expression and say, "See, Keisha. He is having delusions of grandeur now. That is a classic symptom. He thinks he is rich. He thinks he is the boss. His mind is completely gone. It would be the final nail in my coffin. Telling the truth now would only prove his lie." She was too weak to process it. She was too manipulated to see reality. To save her, I had to play the game. I had to let her think I was broken so I could fix her later. I closed my mouth. I swallowed the truth, and it tasted like bitter medicine. "So what do you want me to do, Keisha?" I asked softly. She took a deep breath. "Gavin found a doctor, a specialist, Dr. Thorne. He is a friend of Gavin's family, but he is very respected. He can evaluate you. If he says you are okay, then fine. But if he says you are sick..." She couldn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. "You want to put me in a home," I said. "Not just any home," Keisha cried. "Shady Pines. It is nice, Daddy." Gavin showed me the brochure. "And if we sell the land, if we sign that deal, we can afford the best suite for you." So that was it. The medical diagnosis was just the key to unlock the property sale. If I was declared incompetent, Gavin would get power of attorney. He would sign the land deal. He would get the $5 million. And I would be locked away in a room with padded walls. I looked at my daughter. She was breaking apart. She truly believed she was doing the right thing. She believed she was saving me from myself. Gavin had twisted her love for me into a weapon against me. "Okay," I said. She blinked, surprised. "Okay, I will see the doctor," I said, straightening my back just a little. "If this Dr. Thorne says I am sick, I will listen." Keisha threw her arms around me, hugging me tight. "Thank you, Daddy. Thank you for being reasonable. I just want you to be safe. I love you so much." I hugged her back, smelling the lavender shampoo she had used since she was a child. "I love you too, baby girl. More than you know." She pulled away, wiping her eyes. "The appointment is at 2:00. Gavin is going to drive us." I watched her walk back to the house, her step a little lighter. She thought she had solved the problem. She didn't know she had just scheduled an appointment with the devil. I picked up my broom again. "Dr. Thorne, I knew that name. I had done my research on Gavin's circle of friends. Thorne wasn't a specialist. He was a discredited psychiatrist who had lost his license in Florida for insurance fraud before moving to Georgia. He was a man who would sign anything for an envelope of cash. Gavin thought he was sending a lamb to the slaughter. He thought he was driving a confused old man to his doom. But as I swept the dust from the concrete floor, I formulated my plan. I wasn't going to that office to get a checkup. I was going to get evidence. I reached into my pocket and touched the small voice recorder. I checked the battery on my phone inside my jacket. "You want to play Dr. Gavin?" I whispered to the empty warehouse. "Fine. Let's see who has the steady hand when the surgery really starts." I walked back to my shack to change into my Sunday suit. It was frayed at the cuffs and smelled of mothballs, perfect for the role I had to play. I looked at myself in the cracked mirror. "Showtime, Moses," I said to my reflection. I walked out to the driveway where Gavin's Range Rover was waiting. He was leaning against the hood, wearing sunglasses, looking like he had already spent the money he didn't have yet. "Ready for a little road trip, Mo?" he asked, flashing that shark smile. I shuffled toward the car, gripping my cane. "Ready as I will ever be, Gavin," I said, my voice trembling just enough to satisfy him. He opened the door for me. Such a gentleman. As I climbed in, I saw him exchange a look with Keisha in the passenger seat. A look of victory. He started the engine and we rolled out of the gates, leaving my empire behind in the rearview mirror. But I wasn't leaving it for good. I was just going out to sharpen my sword. Dr. Thorne's office did not smell like a hospital. It smelled like expensive cologne and old money. It was located on the top floor of a glass building in Buckhead, the kind of place where the elevators had marble floors and the receptionist looked like a runway model. I sat on a leather sofa that probably cost more than my first delivery truck, clutching my cane with both hands. I kept my mouth slightly open and let my eyes wander aimlessly around the room, avoiding direct contact with anyone. To the world, I was a confused old man overwhelmed by the luxury. But inside, I was memorizing every detail. Gavin was pacing back and forth, checking his watch every 30 seconds. He was wearing his lucky blue suit, the one he wore when he closed deals. Because that is what today was for him. It was not a medical appointment. It was a business transaction. Keisha sat next to me, holding my arm. Her grip was tight, desperate. She was trembling. "It is going to be okay, Daddy," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "Dr. Thorne is the best. Gavin says he is a miracle worker." I looked at her with my watery eyes. "Who is Dr. Thorne, baby? Is he the one who fixes the trucks?" Keisha bit her lip, trying not to cry. "No, Daddy. He fixes memory. He is going to help you remember things." Gavin stopped pacing and looked at us. His impatience was leaking through his mask of concern. "Keep him calm, Keisha," he snapped. "We need him lucid enough to fail the test naturally. If he just sits there drooling, it looks staged. He needs to answer the questions wrong, not just stay silent." Gavin, Keisha hissed, hurt flashing in her eyes. "He is right here. He can hear you. He does not understand what I am saying." Gavin scoffed. "Look at him. He is counting dust motes." Just then, the heavy mahogany double doors opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, with silver hair slicked back and a tan that came from a tanning bed, not the sun. He wore a white coat over a suit that looked tailored in Italy. Dr. Lawrence Thorne. I recognized him from the photos Gavin had shown me once at a barbecue. They played golf together at the country club every Sunday. Gavin, my friend Thorne, boomed, extending a hand. "Good to see you, Dr. Thorne." Gavin shook his hand vigorously. "Thank you for fitting us in on such short notice. This is my wife, Keisha. And this is Moses." Thorne looked down at me. His eyes were cold, calculating. He did not see a patient. He saw a favor he owed Gavin. "Hello, Moses," he said, speaking slowly and loudly. "I am Dr. Thorne. Would you like a lollipop?" He was treating me like a child. "I do not like candy," I mumbled, looking at his shoes. I like the warehouse." Thorne chuckled, a dry, condescending sound. "Of course you do. Well, come on back. Let us see what is going on inside that head of yours." He led us into his office. It was enormous, with a view of the Atlanta skyline. There was a massive oak desk in the center of the room, cluttered with awards and framed degrees. I sat in the chair opposite the desk. Keisha tried to come in, but Thorne stopped her. "Family waits outside," he said smoothly. "I need to evaluate him one-on-one. Standard protocol. We do not want him looking to you for answers." But Keisha started. Trust me, babe, Gavin interrupted, putting a hand on her shoulder. Dr. Thorne knows what he is doing. Let the professionals work. Gavin guided Keisha out and closed the door. Before it clicked shut, he gave Thorne a nod that said, get it done. Thorne walked around his desk and sat down. He sighed, checking his Rolex. All right, Moses, he said, dropping the friendly doctor voice completely. Let us make this quick. I have a tea time at 4. He opened a folder on his desk. I leaned forward slightly, resting my chin on my cane. My eyes scanned the desk. And then I saw it. Sitting right there on top of a stack of papers was a document. It was already printed. It was already signed. I squinted. The bold letters at the top read, Cognitive Evaluation Report. I read upside down faster than most people read right side up. Patient name Moses Carter. Date of exam today. Diagnosis advanced vascular dementia. Prognosis. Patient is unable to make financial or medical decisions. Immediate custodial care recommended. The report was already written. He hadn't asked me a single question yet, and I was already diagnosed. It was fraud, plain and simple. Thorne stood up and turned his back to me, walking over to a small wet bar in the corner of the room. Do you want water, Moses? He asked, pouring himself a glass of sparkling water. This was my chance. My hand moved with the speed of a striking cobra. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I didn't tremble. I didn't shake. I held the phone over the desk. The camera lens focused on the fraudulent report. Click. I took 3 photos in 2 seconds, ensuring the text was legible. Then I slipped the phone back into my pocket just as Thorne turned around. When he looked at me, I was slumped in the chair, drooling a little bit onto my lapel. Thorne sipped his water, looking at me with disgust. Jesus, he muttered. How much is the land worth? Gavin, hope it is worth the smell. He sat back down and picked up a pen. Okay, Moses, act like you are listening. I am going to ask you some questions. It does not really matter what you say, but I need to record some audio for the insurance file. He tapped a button on his desk phone. Recording start. Patient Moses Carter. Dr. Lawrence Thorne presiding. He looked at me. Moses, can you tell me what year it is? I looked at him. I could have told him it was 2024. I could have told him the exact time the current stock market trends and the price of gold per ounce. But that is not what the script called for. I scratched my head. The year, well, Nixon is the president, right? So it must be 72. Thorne smirked, scribbling on his notepad. Incorrect. Patient believes it is 1972. Next question, Moses. Can you count backward from 10 for me? I furrowed my brow, acting like he had just asked me to solve a quantum physics equation. 10, I said slowly. 9, 7, apple, truck. Thorne laughed softly. Patient exhibits severe cognitive decline, unable to perform basic numerical sequences. He asked me 5 more questions. I failed every single one of them. I confused my daughter with my wife. I said I lived in a castle made of cardboard. I told him I was waiting for a bus to take me to the moon. With every wrong answer, Thorne looked more pleased. He wasn't diagnosing a disease, he was building a coffin. All right, that is enough, Thorne said, clicking off the recorder. He didn't even check my reflexes or look into my eyes. He picked up the report, the one that had been sitting there the whole time, and stamped it. Certified. He stood up and opened the door. You can come in now, he called out. Gavin and Keisha rushed in. Keisha looked terrified. Gavin looked like a kid on Christmas morning trying to peek at his presents. Well, Dr. Thorne, Keisha asked, her hands clasped together. How is he? Thorne put on his sad face again. It was a terrible performance, but Keisha was too upset to notice. I am afraid it is not good, Mrs. Davis, Thorne said, handing the report to Gavin, not Keisha. Your father has advanced dementia. His cognitive functions are operating at less than 20%. He is not just confused, Keisha, he is gone. The man you knew is not there anymore. Keisha let out a sob and covered her face. No. No, Daddy. Gavin took the paper. I watched his hands. They were trembling, not from fear but from excitement. He scanned the document, his eyes darting to the bottom of the page where the recommendation for power of attorney was written. This is tragic, Gavin said, fighting back a grin. But thank you for being honest, Doc. We just want what is best for him. It says here he needs immediate custodial care, Gavin noted, pointing to the paragraph. That means he cannot live alone, right? He cannot sign contracts. He cannot manage his money. Absolutely not, Thorne said firmly. Legally, he is a child. If he signed anything today, it would be void. You need to take control of his affairs immediately, for his own protection. Gavin nodded, solemn and serious. I understand. It is a heavy burden, but I will carry it. I will take care of everything. He looked at me. He looked at the old man in the frayed suit sitting in the chair. He held the paper up like a shield, like a weapon. Did you hear that, Mo? Gavin said loud and slow. You are sick, but do not worry. I am in charge now. I am going to take care of your warehouse. I looked at him. I looked at the paper in his hand. Thank you, Gavin, I whispered, my voice cracking. You are a good boy. Gavin turned to Keisha. Come on, babe. Let us get him home. We have a lot of paperwork to do tonight. Now that we have the doctor's note, we can finalize the transfer. He shook Thorne's hand one last time. I owe you one, Larry, Gavin whispered. Big time, Thorne replied, winking. We walked out of the office. Gavin walked with a bounce in his step. He held the door open for me, ushering me into the elevator. As the doors closed, trapping us in the box of mirrors, Gavin looked at his reflection. He adjusted his tie. He looked at the paper again. He thought he held the keys to the kingdom. He thought he had won. But he didn't know about the photos in my pocket. He didn't know that Dr. Thorne's medical license was about to be revoked. He didn't know that by declaring me incompetent based on a pre-written report, he had just committed a federal crime that carried a mandatory prison sentence. I looked at my reflection in the elevator door. The old man stared back. Enjoy the paper, Gavin, I thought. Frame it. Because it is the evidence that is going to put you away for 10 years. I leaned my head on Keisha's shoulder. I want to go home now, I whined. We are going home, Mo, Gavin said, pressing the button for the lobby. And tomorrow is going to be a very big day. Yes, it was. Tomorrow was the signing ceremony. Tomorrow all the players would be on stage. And tomorrow the king would finally speak. The rusty hinge of my back door usually screamed like a banshee, but I had greased it with cooking oil 2 hours ago, while Gavin was busy celebrating his victory with a bottle of champagne. I slipped out into the humid Atlanta night, moving through the shadows of the shipping containers like a ghost. The security lights swept across the yard in their predictable rhythm. I knew the timing. I knew every blind spot. I had designed this security system back in '98, and Gavin's cheap upgrades hadn't changed the fundamentals. I made it to the perimeter fence where a loose panel hidden behind a thicket of kudzu allowed me to slip through. A black sedan was waiting for me down the block, idling quietly under a broken street lamp. It wasn't a luxury car. It was an old Ford, generic and invisible, just the way I liked it. I climbed into the back seat. The air conditioning was humming, a welcome relief from the stifling heat. Good evening, Mr. Carter, the driver said without turning around. Just drive, Thomas, I said, leaning back into the shadows. The rusty skillet. 20 minutes later, I walked into a diner that smelled of stale grease-burnt coffee and desperation. The vinyl booths were cracked and the fluorescent lights hummed with a headache-inducing flicker. It was the kind of place where people went when they had nowhere else to go. It was also the last place anyone would look for the most powerful lawyer in Georgia. Arthur Steinberg was sitting in the back booth. He looked completely out of place in his $3,000 charcoal suit, his silk tie contrasting sharply with the sticky formica table. He was cutting into a slice of cherry pie with the precision of a surgeon. When he saw me, he put his fork down and stood up. He didn't offer a handshake. He offered a look of profound respect, the kind of look a soldier gives his commanding officer. Mo, he said, his voice gravelly and warm. You look terrible. That suit has seen better days. I slid into the booth opposite him. It is part of the costume, Arthur. You know I can't wear the bespoke stuff when I am playing the role of the village idiot. Arthur sat down and slid a heavy manila envelope across the table. I picked it up. Inside were the photos I had taken of Dr. Thorne, his fraudulent report, along with a background check on the good doctor that was thick enough to be a novel. I looked at this garbage, Arthur said, pointing a manicured finger at the envelope. Thorne. I remember him. Slippery guy. Lost his license in Florida for overprescribing opioids. Now he is falsifying dementia diagnoses for cash. Mo, give me the word and I will have the medical board revoke his license by noon tomorrow. We can have Gavin arrested for conspiracy before dinner. I shook my head slowly, tapping my fingers on the table. Not yet, Arthur. Arthur leaned forward, his blue eyes intense. Why not, Mo? Look at what they are doing to you. They are treating you like an animal. Gavin is gaslighting your daughter and planning to burn down your life's work. You have the evidence. We can crush him now. Why wait? I looked out the window at the rain that had started to streak the glass. Because if we crush him now, he is just a failed businessman who made a mistake, I said softly. He goes to jail for a few years, maybe gets out on parole. Keisha will cry, she will blame herself. She will think she drove him to it. She is still under his spell. Arthur, she needs to see the monster without the mask. I took a sip of the coffee the waitress had dropped off. It tasted like battery acid. I saved your life once, Arthur, I said, looking him in the eye. Do you remember? Arthur softened. He looked down at his hands. 30 years ago, during the Teamster riots, I was a young public defender, stupid and idealistic, trying to mediate a strike in your parking lot. Those guys, they were going to beat me to death with tire irons. And I walked out there with a baseball bat and made them scatter. I finished. You asked me then how you could ever repay me. I remember Arthur whispered, I told you that one day I would need a shark. Not a lawyer. A shark. Today is that day. Arthur nodded, straightening his tie. Okay, Mo, I am your shark. What is the play? I leaned in, lowering my voice. Gavin thinks he is stealing a warehouse. He thinks he is selling a 5-acre lot for $5 million. He doesn't know about Carter Holdings. Arthur smiled, a thin, cruel smile. He has no idea about the trucking fleet, the logistics software patents, the commercial real estate in 3 states. Exactly, I said. The warehouse is just the garage, Arthur. The company is worth $50 million. And because of the blind trust structure I set up when Keisha was born, Gavin thinks the assets are held by a board of directors. He thinks I am just the janitor who came with the building. I pulled a napkin from the dispenser and smoothed it out. He wants to sell the land, I continued. He has a buyer lined up, some developer who wants to build condos. Gavin wants to rush the closing. He wants to sign the deal this Friday at the warehouse. He wants a ceremony. He wants press. He wants to show the world that he is a big shot. Let him, I said. Arthur raised an eyebrow. You want him to organize the sale of your own property. I want him to build the stage, I said, my voice hardening. I want him to invite the cameras. I want him to invite the city council. I want him to stand up there in his best suit holding that pen thinking he has won. I want him to climb so high that when he falls he creates a crater. Arthur began to chuckle. It was a low rumbling sound. You are a cold man, Moses Carter. I am a father, I corrected him. And sometimes a father has to burn the forest to save the tree. Keisha needs to see him humiliated. She needs to see him stripped of everything publicly. She needs to see that the man she married is a hollow shell. Okay, Arthur said, pulling out a notepad. So we let the signing ceremony proceed. I will contact the buyer's legal team quietly. I will let them know there might be a title dispute, but I will tell them to show up anyway. They will want to see the fireworks. And the utilities, I asked. Arthur checked his notes. I made the call to the water and power company like you asked. They are freezing the commercial accounts for the warehouse tomorrow morning, citing an administrative error. Good, I said. Gavin will think it is just bad luck, or he will blame me. It will push him to the edge. It will make him reckless. When he is reckless, he makes mistakes. He is going to make your life hell for the next few days, Mo, Arthur warned. No water, no lights. In that heat. I can handle the heat, I said, standing up. I worked in that warehouse before it had air conditioning. I can handle a few days of darkness. Arthur stood up too. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small burner phone. Take this, he said. Direct line to me. Encrypted. If he touches you, if he gets violent, you call me. I will have a SWAT team there in 4 minutes. I took the phone and slipped it into my sock. He won't get violent, I said. Not yet. He is a coward. Cowards only strike when they think nobody is watching, and he thinks nobody is watching the old man. I threw a $20 bill on the table for the coffee. Go home, Arthur. Get some sleep. Friday is going to be a long day. Arthur watched me go. Be careful, Mo. I walked back out into the rain. The drops felt cool against my skin, washing away the grime of the diner, but not the grime of the situation. I had built an empire from nothing. I had fought racism, I had fought poverty, I had fought competitors who wanted to see me fail. But this battle was different. This was a war for my bloodline. I got back into the black sedan. "Take me back to the prison, Thomas," I said. As the car glided back toward the warehouse district, I closed my eyes. I visualized Friday. I visualized the look on Gavin's face when the true owner of Carter Holdings stood up. He wanted to sell my past. He didn't know I had already bought his future. The car stopped a block away from the warehouse. I slipped back through the kudzu, back through the fence, back into the damp, silent shack. I lay down on my cot, listening to the rain hammer against the tin roof. Tomorrow the water would be cut off. Tomorrow the lights would go out. The suffering was about to begin. But I smiled in the darkness, because every drop of sweat I was about to shed was just fuel for the storm that was coming for Gavin. And unlike the rain, this storm would not wash him clean. It would wash him away. The heat in Atlanta does not just make you sweat, it tries to break you. It sits on your chest like a wet wool blanket, heavy and suffocating, making every breath a labor. In July, the air is so thick you can practically chew it. I was sitting in my armchair reading a paperback novel by the light of a single bulb, the electric box fan rattling in the corner like a dying engine. That fan was the only thing standing between me and heat stroke. It was my lifeline. Then, without a flicker or a warning, the room plunged into darkness. The fan blade spun down to a halt. The silence that followed was instant and oppressive. The humidity, which had been kept at bay by the moving air, immediately rushed in, filling the corners of the room. I sat there in the dark. I didn't move. I didn't panic. I knew exactly what had happened. I reached for the lamp switch. Click. Nothing. I stood up and walked to the kitchenette, my feet dragging on the floorboards. I turned the faucet handle. A hollow gurgle echoed in the pipes, then nothing. Not a drop. No lights. No fan. No water. I walked to the window and looked out at the main house. It was blazing with light. The security floodlights were on the porch. Lights were welcoming, and I could hear the faint hum of their central air conditioning unit chugging away, keeping Gavin and Keisha cool in 68-degree comfort. This was not a power outage. This was a siege. I wiped a bead of sweat from my forehead. Gavin had made his move. He knew he couldn't physically drag me out of the shack without causing a scene, so he had decided to smoke me out. He wanted to bake me in my own home until I crawled to him, begging for mercy, begging to sign those papers just for a glass of ice water. A few minutes later, I saw a flashlight bobbing across the yard. It was Keisha. "Daddy, Daddy, are you in there?" she called out, her voice filled with panic. I opened the screen door. "I am here, baby girl." "Oh, thank God," Keisha shined the light in my face. "It is so dark." Gavin said the power went out. He said the sub-panel that feeds the shack blew a fuse or something. "The wiring is so old, Daddy." She was reciting a script. I could hear Gavin, his words coming out of her mouth. "Is the water out too?" she asked, stepping inside. It was already 10 degrees hotter in here than outside. "Dry as a bone," I said calmly. "Oh no," Keisha put a hand to her mouth. Gavin called the utility company. He says because the wiring is non-compliant, they have to send a special team. He says it could take a week to fix, maybe longer. A week. In 95-degree heat, without water. For a man of 71, that was a death sentence. "Daddy, you cannot stay here," Keisha pleaded, grabbing my arm. "It is going to be over 100 degrees tomorrow. You will get heat stroke. Please just come stay in the guest room. Or we can take you to Shady Pines tonight. They have emergency intake. You will be cool and safe there." I gently removed her hand from my arm. "I am not going to Shady Pines, Keisha," I said, "and I am not sleeping in the guest room. Gavin made it clear I am not welcome in that house. He is just stressed." Daddy, Keisha argued, tears forming. "He is trying to help. He said if you sign the papers, we can get you into the deluxe suite at the nursing home immediately. You won't have to deal with this broken-down shack anymore." I walked over to my cupboard and pulled out a box of emergency candles and a lighter. The flame flickered to life, casting long dancing shadows on the walls. "Keisha," I said, looking at her in the dim light, "do you remember when I drove long haul in the 80s? She blinked, confused by the change of subject. "Yes, but do you remember that summer the AC broke in my rig when I was crossing the Mojave Desert? It was 115 degrees. The pavement was melting. But I had a delivery to make. I had to get those medical supplies to the hospital in Phoenix. I did not quit, Keisha. I did not abandon my truck. I drank warm water. I wrapped a wet towel around my neck, and I drove. I looked around my small, silent home. I am not leaving my home because of a blown fuse. I have water bottles under the sink. I have candles. I will be fine. But Daddy, go back to the big house, baby girl, I said firmly. Go back to your husband. Tell him the old man is comfortable. Tell him I like the quiet. Keisha hesitated, torn between her duty to her father and the fear her husband had instilled in her. Finally, she nodded, wiping her eyes. I will bring you some ice in the morning, she whispered. She left. I watched her flashlight disappear back into the fortress of light across the yard. The next 3 days were a battle of wills. The sun beat down on the tin roof of the shack, turning it into an oven. By noon on the first day, the thermometer on my wall read 98 degrees. The air was stagnant. Sweat ran down my back in rivulets, soaking my shirt within minutes. I stripped down to my undershirt. I sat in my rocking chair perfectly still to conserve energy. I rationed the bottled water I had stashed warm and plastic tasting but wet. I saw Gavin watching me. He would stand at the window of his home office on the second floor looking down at the shack. He was waiting for the ambulance. He was waiting to see me collapse. Every time I stepped out onto the porch to catch a breath of air, I made sure to stand tall. I made sure to look directly at his window and smile. On the second day, he came out. He walked across the yard wearing crisp linen shorts and a polo shirt, holding a glass of iced tea. The glass was sweating beads of condensation dripping down his hand. He took a long, exaggerated sip as he stood at the bottom of my porch steps. "Hot one today, huh, Mo?" he said, smacking his lips. I rocked in my chair slowly, the wood creaking in the silence. "It is summer in Georgia, Gavin," I said. "It is supposed to be hot." He chuckled, shaking the ice in his glass. The sound was like music torture to a thirsty man. "You look terrible, Mo. Your skin is gray. You are shaking. You know dehydration can kill a man your age in a few hours. Your kidneys shut down. Your heart gives out. It is a painful way to go." "I am fine," I said. "My ancestors worked cotton fields in this heat, Gavin. I think I can handle sitting on a porch." He narrowed his eyes. The arrogance in his face flickered, replaced by annoyance. "Why are you being so stubborn?" he snapped. "Just sign the damn papers. I have the notary coming tomorrow. Just put your name on the line and this ends. You get a C, you get cable TV, you get ice cream. Why are you fighting me?" "Because I like it here," I said. "I like the view." He looked around at the dusty yard, the weeds, the rusting equipment. "You like the view," he scoffed. "You are delusional. You are a senile old fool clinging to a piece of trash because you have nothing else." He took another sip of tea, then poured the rest of it onto the dry, dusty ground at the foot of the stairs. The dark liquid sizzled as it hit the dirt. "Oops," he said with a cruel smile. "Butterfingers." He turned and walked away. That night was the hardest. The heat didn't break even after the sun went down. The shack held the temperature like a kiln. I lay on top of my sheets staring at the dark ceiling. My head was pounding. My mouth was so dry my tongue felt like sandpaper. I thought about giving up. I thought about how easy it would be to just sign the paper and drink a gallon of cold water. But then I thought about the video. I thought about Gavin discussing burning me alive. If I gave in now, he won't just take the land. He would destroy Keisha. He would take the money and leave her, or worse, keep her as a trophy wife while he spent my fortune. No, I would not break. I closed my eyes and focused on my breathing. I slowed my heart rate. I went to a place in my mind that I hadn't visited since I was a young man facing down angry mobs. A place of cold steel resolve. By the morning of the third day, I was weak physically, but mentally, I was unbreakable. I heard heavy footsteps on the porch. The door banged open. Gavin stood there. He looked furious. He had expected me to be unconscious by now. Instead, I was sitting at my small kitchen table, whittling a piece of wood by the light of the morning sun. "Still here," he spat. "Still here," I rasped. "This is ridiculous," Gavin yelled. "The utility company called. They cannot come until next week. You are going to die in here, Mo, and I am not going to be responsible for it." "Then turn the water back on," I said without looking up. "I told you it is broken," he shouted. "It is not broken, Gavin," I said softly. "You turned the valve at the main junction box. I saw you do it." He froze. For a second, he looked terrified. Then his face twisted into a sneer. "You are hallucinating. The heat is cooking your brain." He slammed his hand on the table. "Tomorrow is Friday, Mo. The signing ceremony is at noon. I am bringing the papers here first. You are going to sign them. And then you are going to get out of my life." He leaned in close. I could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the sour scent of his desperation. "If you don't sign them," he whispered, "I will have you declared mentally incompetent by the state. I will have you thrown in the state ward, not Shady Pines, the one with the rats, and I will make sure Keisha never visits you." He stormed out, leaving the door wide open. I watched him go. He was unraveling. He had tried kindness, he had tried manipulation, and now he had tried torture. Nothing had worked. He was desperate. And a desperate man makes mistakes. I picked up my phone. The battery was at 12%. I sent one text message to Arthur. Text message to Arthur. "He is ready. He thinks I am broken. Be at the ceremony. Bring the hammer." I put the phone down and picked up my water bottle. There was one sip left. I drank it, savoring the warm liquid. Laugia ne die nudia, tough as a leech. That is what he was thinking. He was right. I was a leech, and I had attached myself to his conscience, to his greed, to his lies, and I wasn't letting go until I had sucked the poison out of my family. Tomorrow the lights would come back on, but for Gavin it would be lights out forever. The fourth day without water was a slow crawl through a furnace. My skin felt like parchment, and my throat was so dry it hurt to swallow. I woke up at dawn not because the sun was bright, but because the heat in my shack had reached a tipping point where sleep was no longer possible. I sat on my porch watching the main warehouse. It stood there like a silent giant silhouetted against the hazy Georgia sky. My empire, my legacy. And today it felt like my tomb. Gavin was already active. I could see him moving through the loading docks, his silhouette sharp and frantic. He was preparing for the signing ceremony tomorrow. He was arranging chairs and checking light fixtures and acting like a man who had already cashed the check. But I knew better. I knew he was unraveling. Every time he looked toward my shack and saw me still sitting there, still breathing, still refusing to break, I could see the twitch in his jaw. Around 10 in the morning, I decided to go for a walk. I needed to move my legs, and more importantly, I needed Gavin to see me moving. I put on my old work boots and grabbed my cane. I shuffled toward the main warehouse entrance, my gait slow and heavy. I looked like a man who was one step away from collapsing. The warehouse interior was cooler than the shack, but the air was stagnant. Rows upon rows of high-reach shelving towered above me, packed with crates and pallets. I knew the layout of this floor like I knew the back of my hand. I knew which floorboards creaked and which sensors were active. And I knew about the hidden camera I had installed 2 nights ago in the rafters of Section 4. As I walked toward the back of the building, I passed under a heavy pallet of industrial machinery. It was stacked 3 levels high, weighing at least 2,000 pounds. The yellow nylon straps holding it in place looked secure to the naked eye. But as I approached, I felt a prickle on the back of my neck. A warning. I didn't stop. I kept walking, my cane tapping a rhythmic beat on the concrete. Tap, tap, tap. Then I heard it. A sharp metallic snap. In a split second, I shifted my weight. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I simply pivoted on my good leg and leaned back against a sturdy support beam just as the pallet lurched forward. The sound was like a bomb going off. 2 tons of steel and wood slammed into the concrete floor exactly where I had been standing a second before. Dust and splinters exploded into the air. The vibration shook the entire building, rattling the windows in the second-floor office. I stood perfectly still in the cloud of settling dust. I didn't even blink. Gavin came charging out of the break room, screaming at the top of his lungs. His face was a mask of rehearsed horror. Mo. Oh my God, are you okay? He ran toward the wreckage, tripping over his own feet. He skidded to a stop, looking at the smashed machinery, then at me. His eyes were wide searchingly. He was looking for blood. He was looking for a body. When he saw me standing there leaning against the beam, his expression shifted for a fraction of a second from horror to pure, unadulterated disappointment. "You almost died!" Gavin shrieked, grabbing me by the shoulders and shaking me. "You almost died, you crazy old man! What were you doing over here? This area is restricted. I told you to stay in the shack." I looked down at his hands on my shoulders. They were gripping me so hard his knuckles were white. "The strap snapped, Gavin," I said, my voice low and steady. "It just snapped. It was an accident," Gavin yelled, his voice echoing off the high ceiling. "It was a freak accident, but this is exactly what I have been talking about. Keisha, look at this." He turned around as Keisha came running down the stairs, her face pale with fright. He wandered right into a drop zone. Keisha Gavin shouted, gesturing wildly at the wreckage. He doesn't know where he is. If he had been 6 inches to the left, he would be a pancake right now. Do you see why we need to move him? He is going to get himself killed if we don't put him in a facility today. Keisha fell to her knees beside me, sobbing. Daddy, please. Please, just listen to him. You almost died. I can't lose you like this. Gavin leaned in close to me, his breath hot and smelling of cheap coffee. He whispered into my ear so Keisha couldn't hear. That was your last warning, Mo. Sign the papers tonight or the next one won't miss. I didn't look at Keisha. I didn't look at the wreckage. I turned my head and looked directly into Gavin's eyes. I didn't look like a senile old man anymore. I looked like the man who had survived the riots, the man who had built this warehouse from a pile of dirt. I reached up and grabbed Gavin's wrist. My grip was like a steel vise. I felt him flinch. I felt the sudden surge of fear pass through his arm as he realized the old man was a lot stronger than he looked. Your hand is shaking, Gavin, I whispered. He tried to pull away, but I held on. Look at it, I said. You are trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. What are you talking about? Let go of me, Gavin hissed. Are you shaking because you almost killed your father-in-law? I asked, my voice a cold razor blade. Or are you shaking because you failed? Gavin's eyes darted toward the rafters, toward the spot where the camera was hidden. He looked like a cornered animal. It was an accident, he stammered. I leaned in closer until our noses were almost touching. I let him see the predator behind the mask. I saw you, Gavin. I saw you up there an hour ago with the bolt cutters. I saw you fray the straps, and I saw you watching from behind the crate, waiting for me to walk under. Gavin's face went from red to a ghostly gray. He stopped struggling. He just stood there frozen. You think you are the only one with cameras in this building? I asked. You think you can commit murder in my house and get away with it? Keisha? Gavin yelled suddenly, trying to create a distraction. He is talking nonsense again. He thinks I tried to hurt him. He is having a paranoid episode. I let go of his wrist. I turned to Keisha, who was looking back and forth between us in total confusion. Keisha, I said softly, go back to the house. I need to speak to your husband alone. No, Keisha sobbed. Daddy, you need a doctor. Go, Keisha, I commanded. The authority in my voice was so absolute, so reminiscent of the man she used to idolize that she didn't argue. She stood up, wiped her eyes, and walked slowly toward the stairs. Once she was out of earshot, I turned back to Gavin. He was backing away toward the exit, his eyes darting around for a way out. Friday at noon. Gavin, I said. What, he asked, his voice cracking. The signing ceremony, I said. You are going to go ahead with it. You are going to invite the buyers. You are going to invite the press. You are going to invite everyone you ever wanted to impress. Gavin frowned. Why would you want that? Because I want the whole world to see what happens to a man who tries to burn down his father's house, I said. I stepped over the wreckage of the machinery and walked toward him. He actually recoiled as if I were going to strike him. You are going to bring those papers to the ceremony, I continued, and I am going to be there. I am going to sit right in the front row, and when the time comes, I am going to give you exactly what you deserve. I am the one with the doctor's note, Gavin blustered, trying to regain his confidence. I am the one with power of attorney. You are nothing. I smiled. It was a slow, dangerous smile. Then you have nothing to worry about, do you, Gavin? Just a crazy old man at a party. I walked past him, heading toward the loading dock doors. I felt his eyes on my back, full of hate and terror. I stepped out into the blinding Georgia sun. The heat didn't feel so bad anymore. I had a purpose now. I had a target. Gavin thought he had almost ended my story today. He thought he was writing the final chapter. He didn't realize that he had just given me the perfect opening for the sequel. I walked back to my shack and sat down on the porch. I picked up my wood carving. Tomorrow at noon, the curtain would go up. Tomorrow the lights would finally be bright enough for everyone to see the truth. I looked at the warehouse, and for the first time in years I felt like the owner again. Sleep well, Gavin, I thought. Enjoy your last night of luxury, because tomorrow you are going to find out that a man like me doesn't die in an accident. I am the one who makes the accidents happen, and you are standing right in the middle of the drop zone. The heavy humidity of the Georgia morning had finally broken, giving way to a deceptive breeze, but the atmosphere inside Gavin's Range Rover was thick with an arrogance that made the air feel thin. I watched from the window of my shack as they pulled away. Gavin was dressed in a silk suit that probably cost 3 months of my old trucking salary, and Keisha was wearing a sundress he had forced her to buy. He was taking her to Phipps Plaza, the most expensive shopping center in Atlanta, to celebrate the kill. He thought he had the $5 million in his pocket. He thought the old man was broken and the treasure chest was wide open. But as the dust from their tires settled on my gravel driveway, I pulled out the burner phone Arthur had given me. I tapped out a single word to the shark. Proceed. At the mall, Gavin was walking like a man who owned the pavement. He led Keisha into a high-end designer boutique where the sales clerks bowed like servants. He started grabbing dresses off the racks, tossing them at Keisha like she was a mannequin. "Spend whatever you want, babe," he boomed loud enough for every customer in the store to hear. "We are moving into the big leagues now. No more budget living. No more smelling like warehouse grease." Keisha looked uncomfortable, clutching her purse. "Gavin, we should wait until the papers are signed tomorrow. What if something happens?" "Nothing is going to happen." Gavin laughed, brushing her off. "The doctor's report is ironclad. The buyer is ready. The only thing left is for the old man to drool on the signature line and we are golden. Now pick a bag, that Italian leather one, the $5,000 one." He marched up to the counter with a pile of luxury goods that would have paid for a year of my mortgage. He pulled out his gold corporate credit card, the one he used to fund his lifestyle on the company's dime. He flicked it onto the counter with a smirk. The sales clerk swiped the card. A pause. The machine let out a long, sharp beep. "I am sorry, sir," the clerk said, her voice polite but firm. "It says declined." Gavin's smile froze. He snatched the card back. "Try it again. Your machine is broken. This is a high-limit business account." The clerk swiped it again. Beep. Declined. "Sir, perhaps you have another card." Gavin pulled out his personal card, his face turning a shade of red that clashed with his silk tie. "Use this one." Beep. Declined. Keisha stepped forward, her face flushing with embarrassment as other shoppers began to whisper. "Gavin, maybe we should just go. Maybe there is a glitch at the bank. Get away from me, Keisha." Gavin snapped his voice, losing its polished veneer. He grabbed his phone and dialed his bank representative, screaming before the man could even say hello. "What the hell is going on with my accounts? I have a closing tomorrow. I am a Tier 1 client." I could almost hear the calm voice on the other end. I had instructed Arthur to trigger a suspicious activity alert through our majority shareholding in the parent bank. "Sir," the representative said through the speakerphone, "your accounts have been temporarily frozen pending an emergency audit. There were some inconsistencies found in the corporate filings for your real estate firm, specifically regarding the ownership of the collateral assets." "Ownership," Gavin shrieked. "I am the owner. I have the power of attorney." "The audit is mandatory, sir," the voice replied. "All funds are locked until Monday morning." Gavin slammed his phone against the marble counter so hard the screen cracked. He looked like a wild animal, cornered and rabid. He turned his rage toward the only person he felt he could control. "This is your fault," he hissed at Keisha, grabbing her arm so hard she winced. "You and your damn father. You probably didn't update the emergency contact info, or you messed up the filing." "Gavin, stop it," Keisha pleaded, trying to pull her arm away. "You are hurting me. Everyone is looking. Let them look," Gavin roared. He dragged her out of the store, his fingers digging into her skin. He didn't care about the dresses or the bags anymore. He cared about the power. His world was built on a foundation of stolen money, and as soon as that foundation cracked, the monster came out of the basement. They got to the parking garage, and he threw her against the side of the car. The sound of her back hitting the metal echoed in the concrete space. "You listen to me," Gavin ranted, his face inches from hers. "I have put 5 years into this. 5 years of dealing with your senile father and your boring life. If this deal falls through because of some bank error, I am going to make sure you both end up on the street. I am the one who makes things happen. You would be nothing without me." Keisha stared at him, and for the first time I think she really saw him. Not the husband, not the provider. She saw the man who had turned the gas on. She saw the man who had almost dropped a pallet on her father. She saw the fear behind his anger and the cruelty behind his fear. "You were never worried about my father," Keisha said, her voice low and trembling with a new kind of strength. "You were just worried about the money." Gavin raised his hand, his eyes wide with a manic energy. "Don't you dare speak to me like that." He didn't hit her, not then. But the threat was there, hanging in the air like a heavy blade. He lowered his hand and spat on the ground near her feet. "Get in the car," he ordered. "We are going back. We are going to find that old man, and we are going to make sure he is ready for tomorrow. No more games. No more wine spills. If I have to drag him to that warehouse by his hair, he is going to sign those papers." Keisha got into the car, but she didn't cry. She sat like a statue, staring out the window. She was thinking. She was remembering. She was finally beginning to connect the dots I had laid out for her. They drove back to the warehouse in a silence that was more violent than any shout. Gavin was white-knuckling the steering wheel, his mind racing to find a way to fix the audit. He thought it was just bad luck. He thought it was a bureaucratic mistake. He had no idea that the man he called a waste of space had pulled a single thread and his entire life was starting to unravel. They pulled through the gates and Gavin didn't even wait for the car to stop before he jumped out. He stormed toward my shack, his boots pounding on the gravel. I was sitting on my porch, whittling. I didn't look up. Mo Gavin screamed, "Where are you?" "I am right here, Gavin," I said softly. He reached the steps and looked up at me. He looked like he wanted to kill me right there. His hair was disheveled, his suit was wrinkled, and the sweat was pouring down his face. "Tomorrow at noon," Mo Gavin said, his voice shaking with a terrifying intensity. "No more excuses. No more acting like you don't understand. You are going to put on that suit and you are going to walk into that warehouse." I looked at him and smiled. I didn't give him the senile grin this time. I gave him a look of profound pity. "You look stressed, son," I said. "Maybe you should have a glass of water." "Oh, wait. I forgot. The water is out." Gavin let out a primal scream of frustration and kicked a flower pot off my porch, shattering it into 100 pieces. He turned and ran back to the main house, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Keisha stayed in the car for a long time. She watched me from behind the windshield. I raised my carving knife in a silent salute. She got out slowly and walked toward her house, but she didn't look at Gavin. She looked at the warehouse. She looked at the sign that said Carter. The Chetavny warning had been delivered. Gavin was unraveling. He was showing his true face to the one person he needed on his side. He thought he was losing his money, but he was actually losing his mask. I went back to my carving. The wood was smooth and hard, just like the truth. Tomorrow the bank wouldn't matter. Tomorrow the signatures wouldn't matter. Tomorrow the only thing that would matter was the look on Gavin's face when he realized that the man he tried to destroy had been the one holding the remote control all along. Sleep well, Gavin, I thought. Dream of your 5 million. Because tomorrow you are going to wake up in a nightmare of your own making, and there won't be enough money in the world to buy your way out of it. The shadows were stretching long and jagged across the gravel yard as the sun began to dip behind the jagged skyline of the industrial district. I was not in my shack. I was sitting in the darkness of the old tool shed 10 yards away, watching my own front door through a crack in the wood. I had left the stage set. I had left the bait. I knew my daughter. I knew that despite the years of Gavin as poison dripping into her ear, there was still a part of her that remembered who I was. I knew she could not sleep knowing her father was sitting in a dark oven without a drop of water. A few minutes after Gavin, his Range Rover pulled out of the driveway, heading toward the city for what I assumed was a victory dinner, she appeared. Keisha slipped out of the back door of the main house. She was moving quietly, her head darting back and forth, checking the upstairs windows. She was terrified of her own husband. That realization hurt me more than the heat ever could. She was a grown woman, a vice president in my company, and she was sneaking around her own yard like a thief because she was afraid of a man who didn't own a single brick of the house they lived in. She reached the porch of my shack and paused. She knocked softly once, then twice. "Daddy," she whispered. "Daddy, are you in there?" She didn't get an answer. I remained silent in the tool shed, my heart aching as I watched her shoulders slump. She tried the door. It was unlocked. I wanted her to see. I wanted her to feel the reality of what Gavin was doing. She stepped inside and I could see the glow of her phone screen through the window. She was moving through the tiny room. I knew what she was seeing. She was seeing the empty plastic water bottles lined up on the counter. She was seeing the melted candles and the thick layer of dust that had settled in the stagnant air. She was seeing the thermometer on the wall that still read 92 degrees even after the sun had gone down. I heard a small, choked sob travel across the yard. She had found the kitchen sink. I knew she was turning the handle and hearing that hollow metallic groan that told her the water was still cut off. Gavin had told her the plumbers were coming. He had told her it was a complex city issue. But Keisha wasn't stupid. She could see the main valve from the window. She could see that it was bone dry because someone had physically turned it off. She sat down at my small wooden table. This was the moment I had prepared for. On that table I had left my old leather-bound journal. It wasn't hidden. It was sitting right in the center next to a faded photograph of her mother. I had written in that journal every night for 40 years. Most of it was about the business, the trucks, the logistics, the dreams I had for our family. But the last 10 pages were different. The last 10 pages were a record of the last 5 years. I watched her through the window as she picked it up. She hesitated at first, but then she began to read. I didn't write about my anger. I didn't write about how much I hated Gavin. I knew that would only make her defensive. Instead, I wrote about her. I wrote about the day Gavin called me a houseboy while she was in the shower and how I decided not to tell her because I didn't want to ruin her anniversary dinner. I wrote about the time Gavin threw away the hand-carved cradle I had made for the grandchild we never had, and how I found it in the dumpster and cried in the warehouse so she wouldn't see my tears. I wrote about the way Gavin looked at her when she wasn't looking with a cold calculation that made my blood run cold. I wrote about the gas stove. I wrote about the day I saw Gavin sneaking into the kitchen with a wrench. I wrote about the way he moved the pallets in the warehouse. But mostly I wrote about my love for her. I wrote that I was willing to live in the dark and the heat if it meant I could stay close enough to protect her when the mask finally fell off. Gavin's face. I wrote that I was pretending to be senile because a man who thinks his enemy is weak is a man who becomes reckless. Keisha was shaking now. The phone in her hand was trembling so hard the light was dancing across the walls like a frantic firefly. She turned the pages faster and faster, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. She was seeing the reality of her marriage through my eyes. She was seeing the bruises on her own spirit that she had tried so hard to ignore. But the final blow was yet to come. Tucked into the back cover of the journal was a manila envelope. Inside that envelope was the photo I had taken of the medical report in Dr. Thorne's office, the one that was dated and signed before I had even stepped into the room. I saw her pull it out. I saw her go still. Keisha is a woman of logic. She is a woman of numbers. She looked at the timestamp on that report, 10:15 a.m. She looked at her own phone, checking her calendar or her messages. I knew what she was finding. At 10:15 a.m. that morning, she and Gavin were still in the car. They were stuck in traffic on the I-85. She had sent a text to her assistant at 10:20 saying they were running late. The report said I had been evaluated at 10:15. It said I had failed a cognitive test at a time when I was still sitting in the back seat of a Range Rover 10 miles away. The logic was undeniable. The report was a lie. The doctor was a fraud, and her husband was the architect of the whole deception. She dropped the paper as if it had turned into a poisonous snake. She stood up so quickly the chair fell over with a loud bang. She stood in the middle of my dark, hot shack, and she screamed. Not a loud scream, but a low, guttural sound of pure betrayal. It was the sound of a woman realizing her entire life for the last 5 years had been a carefully constructed prison. She looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time. She looked at the darkness. She looked at the heat. She looked at the used shoes Gavin had given me sitting by the door. She grabbed the journal and the envelope and she ran. She didn't look back. She sprinted across the yard toward the main house. I saw her burst through the back door and slam it behind her. I stepped out of the tool shed. The night air was still hot, but it felt cleaner. I walked over to my porch and sat in my rocking chair. I didn't need to hide anymore. The seed had been planted. The truth was, now a fire burning inside my daughter is mined, and there was no amount of gas Gavin could pour on it to put it out. A few minutes later, the lights in the main house began to flicker. I saw Keisha moving from room to room. She wasn't crying anymore. Her movements were sharp and purposeful. She was looking for things. She was checking the vents. She was checking the stove. She was checking the files in Gavin's office. Gavin would be home soon. He would come back full of expensive wine and arrogance, ready to finish the job tomorrow. He would find a wife who looked the same but who was entirely different on the inside. He would find a woman who had finally opened her eyes. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the nickel the man had thrown at my feet in the conference room. I flipped it into the air and caught it. Tomorrow at noon we were going to have a ceremony. There would be investors and lawyers and a big shiny contract. Gavin would be standing on his stage thinking he was the king of Atlanta, but he didn't know that his queen had just defected. And he didn't know that the janitor was the one who had written the script. I looked at the main house and smiled. For the first time in 5 years, I felt like I could breathe. The heat was still there, the water was still off, but the darkness was gone. The truth had turned the lights back on. Sleep well, Keisha, I thought. Gather your strength. Tomorrow we show them what a Carter is made of. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. I could almost hear the sound of Gavin's car pulling into the driveway. The final act was about to begin, and I wouldn't miss it for the world. The warehouse did not look like my warehouse anymore. The gritty smell of diesel and the honest scent of sawdust had been scrubbed away, replaced by the cloying aroma of expensive floor wax and lilies. Gavin had spent thousands of dollars. He did not have to turn the loading dock into a grand ballroom. He had draped white linens over the industrial shelving and set up a raised mahogany stage right in the center of the floor where my first forklift used to park. It was a stage built for a king, but the man standing on it was nothing but a thief in a tailored suit. I stood in my small shack looking at the reflection in the cracked mirror. I was not wearing the silk suit I had hidden in the floorboards. I was wearing exactly what Gavin had brought me an hour ago. He had walked into my home with a smirk, tossing a plastic bag from a thrift store onto my cot. "Wear this, Mo," he had ordered. "It is important for the cameras. We want you to look authentic. We want people to see the man who worked the docks for 40 years. The suit was 3 sizes too big. The fabric was a scratchy polyester in a shade of brown that looked like dried mud. It was wrinkled and smelled of mothballs and other people as memories. When I put it on, the sleeves swallowed my hands and the trousers pooled around my ankles like a heavy burden. I looked like a caricature of a broken old man. I looked like a man who had been defeated by time and poverty. I looked exactly how Gavin needed me to look. Keisha came in to check on me. She was wearing a black dress and her face was like stone. She looked at me in that baggy suit and I saw her jaw tighten. She saw the insult. She saw the cruelty. She reached out and straightened the lapel of the jacket, her fingers trembling. "Daddy," she whispered, "you don't have to do this. We can just leave right now. We can go to a hotel. I have the papers. I know what he is." I patted her hand gently. "No, baby girl. The world needs to see the show. A man like Gavin doesn't just need to be stopped. He needs to be exposed. He wants a ceremony, so we are going to give him one he will never forget." We walked out of the shack and across the gravel yard. The heat was still there, but the warehouse was pumped full of industrial air conditioning for the guests. As we entered, the music hit me a soft jazz that felt out of place among the steel beams. The room was full of the Atlanta elite, developers in 3-piece suits, politicians looking for a photo op, and reporters from the local business journals. They were all sipping champagne and laughing, their voices echoing off the high ceiling. Gavin saw us and his eyes lit up. He marched over, his chest puffed out like a peacock. He didn't look at Keisha. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He just grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the crowd. "Here he is, gentlemen," Gavin announced, his voice booming with a fake warmth that made my skin crawl. "The man of the hour. My father-in-law, Moses Carter, the backbone of this facility for over 40 years. A few people clapped politely. They looked at my baggy suit and my shuffling gait with a mixture of pity and discomfort. I played the part perfectly. I let my head hang low. I let my hand shake as I reached for a glass of water. I leaned heavily on my cane, acting like the weight of the room was too much for me to bear. Gavin leaned in close to me, his breath smelling of mint and expensive scotch. "Keep it up, Mo," he whispered. "Just a few more minutes, and then you can go back to your shack and rot. Just stay on script." He led me up the stairs to the mahogany stage. In the center was a long table with a single document resting on a leather pad. The $5 million contract, the death warrant for my legacy. Gavin stepped up to the microphone. The room went silent. The cameras from the local news stations turned their lenses toward him. He looked out at the audience with a smile that was so bright it was blinding. He looked like the golden boy of Atlanta real estate. "Thank you all for coming today," Gavin began, his voice smooth and practiced. "Today is not just about a business deal. It is about progress. It is about taking a relic of the past and turning it into a beacon for the future. As many of you know, this land has been in my family for a long time. It has seen better days, but it has always been a place of hard work." He turned and gestured toward me. I was sitting in a folding chair to his left, looking small and fragile in my oversized brown suit. "I want to talk about this man," Gavin said, dropping his voice to a somber tone. "My father-in-law, Moses. Moses is a man who represents a different era. He is a man of simple means, a man who worked with his hands until they couldn't work anymore. He is a proud man, but he is also a tired man." I saw Keisha standing in the front row. Her eyes were fixed on Gavin, and if looks could kill, he would have been a pile of ash on that stage. "For years," Gavin continued, "I have watched this man struggle. I have watched him try to maintain this massive property on a janitor's budget. It was heartbreaking. He was living in a shack surrounded by decay, unwilling to let go because he didn't know how to move forward. But as his son-in-law, I couldn't stand by and watch him suffer any longer. A woman in the front row wiped a tear from her eye. Gavin saw it and leaned into the drama. "I made it my mission to save him," Gavin said, his voice cracking with rehearsed emotion. "I fought for this deal. I negotiated with developers to ensure that Moses would never have to worry about a roof over his head or a meal on his table again. By selling this land, we are providing him with the care he deserves in his final years. We are giving him the dignity that a lifetime of labor should have earned him but didn't." He paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "I do this because I love him," Gavin said, looking directly into the camera. "I do this because in this city, we don't leave our elders behind. We honor them. And today, by signing this contract, I am honoring the life of Moses Carter. I am taking the burden off his shoulders and putting it on mine." Gavin turned toward me and reached out a hand. "Come on, Mo. Let us show them the future." He pulled me up from the chair. I shuffled to the table, my oversized sleeves flapping in the breeze from the air conditioner. Gavin picked up the pen and held it out to me. "Just your signature, Mo," Gavin whispered under his breath. "Sign the line and I will give you a bottle of cold water." I looked at the pen, I looked at the contract. Then I looked at the audience. They were all waiting. They were all watching the poor black man who had worked hard for nothing finally getting his reward from his generous white son-in-law. It was a perfect story for the evening news. I felt the heat of the stage lights on my face. I felt the weight of the hidden camera in my jacket pocket, the one that was streaming this entire event to Arthur Steinberg and the board of directors. I didn't take the pen. I looked at Gavin, and for the first time in 5 years, I let him see the light in my eyes. I didn't blink. I didn't shake. I stood up straight, pulling my shoulders back until the baggy suit didn't look so big anymore. Gavin, his smile faltered. His hand with the pen began to tremble just a little bit. "Mo," Gavin whispered through a frozen grin. "Take the pen. Now." I reached out, but I didn't take the pen. I took the microphone. The feedback echoed through the warehouse, a sharp, piercing sound that made the audience flinch. Gavin tried to grab the mic back, but I stepped aside with a grace he didn't think I possessed. "I want to say a few words," I said into the microphone. My voice didn't sound like the raspy mumble of a senile old man. It was deep, it was resonant, and it carried the authority of a man who had commanded fleets of trucks before Gavin was born. The room went deathly silent. People put down their champagne glasses. The reporters moved closer, their cameras clicking rapidly. Gavin reached for me, his face turning a dark shade of purple. "Mo, sit down. You are confused. The heat has gotten to you." I pushed his hand away. "I am not confused, Gavin. I am finally awake." I looked out at the crowd, at the rich and the powerful of Atlanta. "You all heard my son-in-law," I said. "You heard him talk about my simple means. You heard him talk about my struggle. You heard him call me a poor man who worked for nothing." I paused, looking down at the scratchy brown suit Gavin had forced me to wear. "He is right about one thing," I said. "I have worked hard, but he is wrong about everything else." I saw Arthur Steinberg walk into the back of the room, followed by 4 men in dark suits carrying briefcases. I saw Keisha step forward, her eyes blazing with pride. Gavin was frantic now, grabbing at my jacket. "Security! Someone get him off the stage. He is having a breakdown." I turned to Gavin and smiled. It was the smile of a predator who had finally closed the trap. "The show is over, Gavin," I said. "But the trial is just about to begin." I looked back at the audience and the cameras. "My name is Moses Carter," I said. "And before we sign any contracts, I think it is time we talk about who actually owns this building. And I think it is time we talk about what my son-in-law has been doing while the lights were out." The room exploded into murmurs. Gavin collapsed back against the table, his face turning the color of ash. He looked at the contract, then at me, then at the lawyers approaching the stage. He thought he had built a stage for his victory. He didn't realize he had built a gallows, and the rope was already around his neck. Gavin stood there, bathed in the glow of the stage lights, his gold pen hovering over the signature line like a scepter. He looked out at the sea of expensive suits and flashing cameras with a grin that could have sold ice to an Eskimo. He was at the summit of his lies. He was the hero of his own story, the devoted son-in-law saving a broken old man from his own incompetence. He didn't see me sitting there in my baggy brown suit as a person. To him, I was just a prop, a piece of furniture that needed to be moved so he could remodel the house. The silence in the warehouse was heavy with expectation. The representatives from the real estate conglomerate were leaning forward, their own pens ready to finalize the $5 million theft. Gavin took a deep breath, his chest swelling with an arrogance that made my stomach turn. He looked at the cameras one last time, ensuring his best angle was captured for the evening news. And then the heavy oak doors at the back of the warehouse didn't just open, they slammed against the walls with a sound like a thunderclap. The jazz music cut out instantly. The chatter died in 1,000 throats. Every head in the room turned toward the entrance. Arthur Steinberg walked in first. He didn't shuffle, and he didn't look for a seat. He marched down the center aisle with the cold mechanical precision of a shark scenting blood. His charcoal suit was pressed so sharp it looked like it could cut glass. Behind him, walking with the heavy measured pace of the law, was Sheriff Miller. The sun glinted off the silver star on the sheriff's chest, and the leather of his holster creaked in the sudden absolute silence. Gavin froze. The gold pen stayed suspended in the air. I watched the color drain from his face in real time. It started at his forehead and washed down to his neck, leaving him looking like a statue made of salt. Security. Gavin screamed, his voice cracking and hitting a high note that betrayed his terror. Someone get these people out of here. This is a private event. We are in the middle of a legal closing. He pointed the gold pen at Arthur like it was a weapon. I don't know who you are, but you are trespassing, Sheriff. What is the meaning of this? I pay my taxes. I am a pillar of this community. Sheriff Miller didn't say a word. He just stood at the foot of the stage, his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes fixed on Gavin with a look of profound boredom. He had seen men like Gavin before. They always screamed the loudest right before the handcuffs clicked. Arthur reached the edge of the stage. He didn't look at the crowd, he didn't look at the cameras. He looked straight up at Gavin and smiled a thin, cruel smile that promised nothing but total destruction. I am Arthur Steinberg of Steinberg and Associates, Arthur said. My voice was calm, but it carried to every corner of the room. And I am here on behalf of my client to inform you that this ceremony is over. Gavin let out a hysterical laugh, clutching the contract to his chest as if he could hide it. Steinberg, the ambulance chaser, I have heard of you. You are not representing anyone here. My father-in-law is the only one with an interest in this land, and he is sitting right there. He is incompetent. I have the medical records. I have the legal authority. Gavin turned to the representatives of the buyer who were starting to look very uncomfortable. Don't listen to him. This is just a desperate stunt, a disgruntled employee or something. I have the power of attorney. Arthur stepped up onto the stage. He moved slowly, giving the cameras plenty of time to focus on him. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. You have a power of attorney for Moses Carter, Arthur said, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. That is very impressive, Gavin. Truly. It is a shame it is completely worthless. Gavin stepped back, his heel catching on the edge of the mahogany table. Worthless. It is signed by a board-certified psychiatrist. It is filed with the county. I am his legal guardian. I am the one who decides what happens to this property. Arthur shook his head slowly. You see, Gavin, that is where your little fantasy falls apart. You cannot sell something you do not own. And you certainly cannot sell something that your ward does not own. Gavin squinted at him, the sweat now pouring down his face and staining his silk collar. What are you talking about? Look at the sign on the gate. Carter Logistics. Moses. Carter is the founder. I am his representative. Arthur leaned against the table, looking down at the $5 million contract. Moses Carter is indeed the founder of a company. But the entity that owns this land, the entity that owns every brick, every steel beam, and every square inch of this pavement is a corporation called Carter Holdings International. Gavin scoffed. So what? It is a shell company. Everyone knows that it is all the same pocket. Is it? Arthur asked, raising an eyebrow. Because I have the articles of incorporation right here. Carter Holdings is a private trust, and the bylaws of that trust state very clearly that the assets can only be liquidated or sold with the direct physical signature of the majority shareholder. Gavin smirked, regaining some of his bravado. Fine. My power of attorney covers the majority shareholder. I sign for Moses, and Moses is the shareholder. Arthur let out a soft chuckle. Oh, Gavin, you really should have done more research before you started playing at being a mogul. Arthur turned to the audience and the cameras. He held up his hand, pointing toward me. Moses Carter is not the majority shareholder of Carter Holdings, Arthur announced. He hasn't been for 20 years. The room erupted into a low roar of confusion. Keisha, who was standing by the stage, looked at me, her eyes wide and wet with tears. I gave her a tiny nod. Gavin was shaking now, the gold pen falling from his hand and clattering onto the floor. If he isn't the shareholder, then who is? Arthur turned back to Gavin, and his eyes turned to ice. The majority shares of Carter Holdings have been held in a blind trust since 1999, Arthur said. A trust established for the sole benefit of Keisha Carter. And the only person with the legal authority to sign for that trust, the only person who can authorize the sale of this land, is the trustee. Gavin looked at Keisha, then back at Arthur. Fine, Keisha is my wife. She will sign Keisha, sign the paper. Tell this man to leave. Keisha didn't move. She stood her ground, her face a mask of cold fury. Keisha is not the trustee, Gavin, Arthur said, his voice cutting through. Gavin is panicked like a knife. Gavin was gasping for air now, his tie looking more like a noose with every passing second. Then who is the trustee? Arthur stepped aside and gestured toward me. I stood up. I didn't shuffle. I didn't lean on my cane. I stood tall and I pulled the baggy brown jacket off my shoulders, revealing the tailored black vest underneath. I looked at Gavin, and for the first time, I didn't see a son-in-law. I saw a thief who had been caught with his hand in the vault. The trustee of the Keisha Carter Trust is Moses Carter, Arthur said, but not the Moses Carter you tried to frame. The trust bylaws specify that the trustee must be in full possession of his mental faculties. Gavin pointed a trembling finger at me. Exactly. He is crazy. I have the report. Dr. Thorne said he is gone. That means the backup trustee takes over. And that is me. I am the successor trustee. Arthur smiled. And it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Ah yes, Dr. Thorne, Arthur said. The man who signed a medical evaluation at 10:15 in the morning while my client was still 10 miles away in your car. The man whose medical license was suspended an hour ago by the state board for fraud. Gavin, his jaw dropped. He looked like he was about to faint. The sheriff stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt. Gavin Davis, you have the right to remain silent, Arthur said. But the sheriff finished the thought by pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. Gavin looked at the cameras, then at the crowd, then at the contract that was now just a piece of trash on a table. He looked at me, and I saw the realization hit him. He had spent 5 years trying to steal from a man who had already given everything away to protect the people he loved. You can't do this, Gavin whimpered as the sheriff reached for his arm. I am a businessman. I have a deal. You don't have a deal, Gavin, I said, my voice booming through the warehouse. You have an audience, and they are all waiting to see you walk out of here in chains. The sheriff spun Gavin around, and the metallic click of the handcuffs echoed like a gunshot. The room exploded into noise. Reporters were shouting questions, camera lights were blinding, and the elite of Atlanta were scrambling for the exits, trying to distance themselves from the scandal. I walked to the edge of the stage and looked down at my daughter. She reached up and took my hand. I am sorry it had to be this way, baby girl, I said. She squeezed my hand tight. Don't be daddy. I am just glad the lights are finally on. Gavin was being led down the aisle, his head hanging, his silk suit looking like a shroud. He looked at me one last time, and I didn't see hate in his eyes. I saw the one thing he had always been. A small, insignificant man who thought he could outsmart the world. He thought I was a jester. He thought I was a prop. He thought I was a waste of space. As the sheriff pushed him out the doors, I turned back to the mahogany table. I picked up the $5 million contract and I tore it in half. The warehouse was mine again. The legacy was safe. And for the first time in 71 years, I didn't have to pretend anymore. I am Moses Carter, I thought as I watched the cameras flash. And the show is just getting started. The silence in the warehouse was absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually preceded a car crash or a building collapse. Gavin stood there with the gold pen frozen in midair, his face a mixture of irritation and sudden chilling doubt. He looked at me still sitting in that oversized brown suit looking like a heap of discarded laundry, and he tried to laugh. It was a weak, fluttering sound, like a bird with a broken wing. He leaned toward the microphone, his voice echoing through the massive industrial space. "I think my father-in-law has had a bit too much excitement for one day," he said to the crowd, his eyes darting toward the security guards. "He is a little confused. The heat in that shack must have gotten to him." "Mo, why don't you sit back down and let the professionals handle this?" He reached out to grab the microphone back, his fingers trembling, but I didn't let go. I didn't just hold the mic. I gripped it with a strength that made Gavin's eyes go wide. I stood up. I didn't shuffle. I didn't lean on my cane. I stood at my full height, 7 decades of hard work and unyielding dignity flowing through my spine like electricity. I pulled the baggy jacket off and tossed it onto the mahogany table. Underneath, I was wearing a black silk vest that fit me perfectly. I looked Gavin straight in the eye, and for the first time in 5 years, he saw the man I really was. "I may be old Gavin," I said into the microphone. My voice didn't crack. It didn't tremble. It boomed through the speakers with a resonance that made the champagne glasses on the tables hum. "I may be a retired black truck driver who spent 40 years hauling freight across this country. I may be the man you call a waste of space and a senile fool. But I am not deaf, and I am certainly not stupid." The room erupted in whispers. The reporters were leaning forward, their cameras clicking like 1,000 insects. The investors from the real estate group were looking at each other, their faces pale with confusion. Gavin tried to step in front of me to block the cameras. "Mo, stop this now," he hissed under his breath. "You are ruining everything. Do you want to die in a state ward? Because that is where you are going if you don't shut up." I pushed him aside with one hand, a simple movement that sent him stumbling back against the table. I turned my attention to the giant screen behind the stage, the one Gavin had been using to show glossy renderings of the condos he wanted to build on top of my life's work. "You talked a lot today, Gavin," I said, looking at the crowd. "You talked about progress. You talked about family. You talked about how much you care for the poor old man who was living in a shack. But I think it is time we hear what you say when the cameras aren't rolling." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small remote control. I clicked the button. The screen flickered. The bright images of luxury apartments disappeared, replaced by the grainy gray and white of a night vision security feed. The timestamp in the corner read 2 a.m. 3 nights ago. The setting was unmistakable. It was the east wing of this very warehouse right next to the main electrical panel. The audience gasped. On the screen, Gavin appeared. He wasn't the golden boy of Atlanta real estate anymore. He looked like a common thief, his face twisted with greed and a terrifying lack of conscience. He was standing with 2 men point to the breaker box. "Turn it up," I commanded. The speakers crackled to life. Gavin's voice filled the room, casual and cold. "It has to look like a classic electrical fault," he said on the screen. "Old wiring, overloaded circuits. The insurance investigator will not look twice, especially with a building this age." The lead investor from the conglomerate, a man who had been smiling just minutes ago, stood up, his face turning the color of ash. "Gavin, what is this?" he shouted. "Wait, there is more," I said, my eyes never leaving Gavin's face. On the screen, the camera panned slightly, catching my small shack in the distance. The man with Gavin pointed at it. "What about the shack?" the man asked. "Is the old man home?" Gavin's response was broadcast in high definition to the most powerful people in the city. "Yeah, the old man is there," Gavin said on the video. "He sleeps like the dead. He is practically a vegetable anyway. Let it burn. If he goes with the building, it saves me the monthly cost of a nursing home. It solves 2 problems with 1 match." The video froze on Gavin's face, a mask of murderous intent. The silence that followed was even heavier than before. It was a suffocating weight. Keisha was standing in the front row, her hands over her mouth, her eyes streaming with tears of pure betrayal. The representatives of the buyer were already closing their briefcases and whispering to their legal teams. Gavin was shaking so hard the mahogany table was rattling. He looked at the screen, then at the crowd, then at me. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air on a dry dock. "You wanted a ceremony, Gavin," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You wanted the lights and the cameras. You wanted the world to see you as a success. Well, here we are. The world is watching." I stepped to the edge of the stage, looking down at the investors. "This man did not come here to sell you land," I said. "He came here to sell a life. He came here to sell his soul for a $5 million payout. But he forgot one very important detail." I turned back to Gavin, who was now backed into a corner near the velvet curtains. "You didn't just underestimate me, Gavin," I said. "You underestimated the man who built this place. You thought because I was old and black and quiet that I was easy to erase. You thought you could burn me away like trash. I looked at the cameras, the red lights indicating we were live on the local news. This warehouse is not for sale, I announced. This contract is a fraud. And this man is not my representative. He is a criminal who is about to learn that in this city the truth doesn't just come out, it hits back. The sheriff stepped onto the stage, his heavy boots thudding on the wood. He didn't say a word. He just walked toward Gavin. Gavin looked at the sheriff, then he looked at me, and for a second I saw the monster crumble. He didn't look like a businessman anymore. He looked like a scared little boy who had been caught breaking his father's favorite things. I stood there in the center of the stage, the king of my own domain. The baggy brown suit was on the floor, and the man inside was finally visible. The lights were bright, the cameras were rolling, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the heat of the sun without the fear of the fire. Payoff 1 was complete. But I wasn't finished. Because a man like Gavin doesn't just need to be caught, he needs to be dismantled piece by piece. I looked at my daughter and nodded. The second act was about to begin, and Gavin was about to find out that a $5 million lie is nothing compared to a $50 million truth. Gavin's laughter was a jagged, desperate sound that echoed through the marble hallway, bouncing off the walls like a trapped bird. He pointed a shaking finger at the screen, his face a mottled mask of rage and disbelief. "It is a fake," he screamed, his voice cracking under the pressure of his own panic. "Do not you see what is happening here? This old man has lost his mind. He is just a security guard who has spent too much time watching movies in his little booth. He is a nobody. He is a glorified gatekeeper who probably spent his life savings on a deepfake video just to try and scare us." The family members stood frozen, their eyes darting between the frantic young man and the calm, silent figure of Moses Carter. Moses did not move. He did not shout back. He stood there with the stillness of an oak tree in a storm, his presence filling the room in a way it never had before. For 5 years they had looked past him. They had treated him like a piece of furniture, a convenient servant to be mocked and ignored. But now that silence was terrifying. Moses reached into the inner pocket of his worn jacket. He did not pull out a weapon or a cell phone. He pulled out a simple, thick manila folder. The sound of the paper sliding against his coat seemed louder than Gavin's screaming. He stepped forward and instinctively the crowd parted. He placed the folder on the mahogany table with a soft thud that sounded like a gavel hitting a block. Gavin lunged toward the table, his eyes bloodshot. "This means nothing." He spat, grabbing the documents. "I am the vice president of a top-tier real estate firm. I know how the world works. You cannot just claim ownership because you have some old papers. This land belongs to the city and the developers I represent. You are a squatter in a uniform." Moses finally spoke, and his voice was low, resonant, and utterly devoid of anger. "Gavin, you have always looked at the world through a very small lens. You see a uniform, and you think you see the man. You see a title on a business card, and you think you see power. But power does not reside in a title. Power resides in the truth." Moses tapped the top page of the folder. "Read the third paragraph, Gavin. Read it out loud so your mother and your brothers can hear the reality of the ground they are standing on." Gavin's hands were trembling so violently the paper rattled. He squinted at the text, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "This land," he read, his voice barely a whisper, "is held in perpetuity by the primary stakeholder of Carter Logistics." He stopped, shaking his head. Carter Logistics. That is a global shipping conglomerate. They do not do residential real estate. What does this have to do with you? You share a name that is all. It is a coincidence. Moses leaned in closer, his shadow falling over Gavin. "There are no coincidences in my world, Gavin. Only plans. 30 years ago, I founded Carter Logistics. I built it from a single truck and a rented warehouse while you were still learning how to tie your shoes. I stepped away from the public eye a long time ago to see what my family would become if they thought the well had run dry. I wanted to see if the values I tried to teach you, respect, hard work, integrity, would survive without the influence of my checkbook." Gavin backed away, hitting the wall. No, that is impossible. You have been working the night shift at the gate for 5 years. You live in a studio apartment. You wear the same shoes every day." I was watching. Moses set his eyes hard as flint. "I was watching how you treated the waiter when you thought no one was looking. I was watching how you spoke to the cleaning staff. And most importantly, I was watching how you treated a father who you thought had nothing left to give you. You failed the test, Gavin. Every single day for 5 years you chose arrogance over blood. You chose greed over gratitude. But Moses was not finished. The mismatch of power was about to become a total collapse. He turned another page in the folder. Now let us talk about your career, Gavin. You are very proud of your position at Vanguard Real Estate, are you not? You love to tell everyone how you earned that vice presidency through your own brilliance. Gavin straightened his tie, a final pathetic attempt to regain his dignity. I did. I closed the Highland deal. I brought in the offshore investors. Moses smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You closed the Highland deal because the owner of the land was instructed to accept your bid. And those offshore investors, they are subsidiaries of Carter Logistics. I built a glass cage for you to play in, Gavin. I wanted to see if you would use your position to build something real, or if you would just use it to bully people. Moses took a step closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that cut through the room like a blade. Vanguard Real Estate is a fine company, but it is not an independent one. It is owned by the Heritage Trust, and I own 51% of the shares in that trust. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence so heavy it felt like it was crushing the air out of the room. Gavin's face went from red to a ghostly, sickly white. His mouth hung open, but no sound came out. The realization was washing over him like a tidal wave. For 5 years, he had spent every holiday, every family dinner, and every chance encounter insulting, mocking, and belittling the man who was literally signing his paychecks. He had called his boss a loser. He had told the man who owned his entire professional life that he was a drain on society. Moses picked up the folder, his movements precise and calm. You told me earlier today that I should be grateful you even allowed me to sit at the table. You told me that I was a relic of the past that needed to be cleared away for the new generation. Well, Gavin, the past is catching up to you. I am not your subordinate, Moses said, standing tall, the authority of a titan finally radiating from him. I am not your driver. I am not your security guard. I am the chairman of the board. And as of 5 minutes ago, when I sent a single text message to the board of directors, your employment at Vanguard has been terminated for cause. Gavin slumped to his knees, his hands covering his face. The folders and papers scattered around him like the debris of a fallen empire. He had spent years building a house of cards on a foundation of lies and cruelty, and his father had just blown it all down with a single breath of truth. Moses looked down at his son, not with hatred, but with a profound, weary sadness. You thought money was the only thing that gave a man value. You thought that because I had no suit and no title, I had no power. You forgot that the man who built the mountain always knows where the loose stones are. The rest of the family stood in the shadows, terrified to speak, terrified to move. They realized that the world they thought they lived in, a world where they were the masters and Moses was the servant, had never existed. They were all living in a house he had built, eating food he had provided, and breathing air he had paid for. Moses turned toward the door, his footsteps firm on the floor. I am going back to my house now, he said without looking back. Not the studio apartment, the estate on the hill, the one you told me I would never be good enough to even clean. Tomorrow my lawyers will contact you about the repayment of the loans I secretly facilitated for your lifestyle. Since you are so talented and brilliant, I am sure you will have no trouble finding a way to pay me back. As Moses walked out into the cool night air, the sound of Gavin's sobbing began to fill the room. It was the sound of a man who had lost everything, not because it was stolen from him, but because he had never truly earned it. Moses didn't feel joy in the victory. He felt the peace of a man who had finally set the record straight. He had spent years being the underestimated man, and in the end he didn't need to raise his voice to win. He only had to reveal the truth. The order was restored. The pride was gone. And for the first time in 5 years, Moses Carter felt like he could finally breathe. Gavin's laughter was a jagged, desperate sound that echoed through the marble hallway, bouncing off the walls like a trapped bird. He pointed a shaking finger at the screen, his face a mottled mask of rage and disbelief. It is a fake, he screamed, his voice cracking under the pressure of his own panic. Do not you see what is happening here? This old man has lost his mind. He is just a security guard who has spent too much time watching movies in his little booth. He is a nobody. He is a glorified gatekeeper. who probably spent his life savings on a deepfake video just to try and scare us. The family members stood frozen, their eyes darting between the frantic young man and the calm, silent figure of Moses Carter. Moses did not move. He did not shout back. He stood there with the stillness of an oak tree in a storm, his presence filling the room in a way it never had before. For 5 years, they had looked past him. They had treated him like a piece of furniture, a convenient servant to be mocked and ignored. But now, that silence was terrifying. Moses reached into the inner pocket of his worn jacket. He did not pull out a weapon or a cell phone. He pulled out a simple, thick manila folder. The sound of the paper sliding against his coat seemed louder than Gavin's screaming. He stepped forward and instinctively the crowd parted. He placed the folder on the mahogany table with a soft thud that sounded like a gavel hitting a block. Gavin lunged toward the table, his eyes bloodshot. "This means nothing," he spat, grabbing the documents. "I am the vice president of a top-tier real estate firm. I know how the world works. You cannot just claim ownership because you have some old papers. This land belongs to the city and the developers I represent. You are a squatter in a uniform. Moses." Moses finally spoke, and his voice was low, resonant, and utterly devoid of anger. "Gavin, you have always looked at the world through a very small lens. You see a uniform and you think you see the man. You see a title on a business card and you think you see power, but power does not reside in a title. Power resides in the truth." Moses tapped the top page of the folder. "Read the third paragraph, Gavin. Read it out loud so your mother and your brothers can hear the reality of the ground they are standing on." Gavin's hands were trembling so violently the paper rattled. He squinted at the text, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "This land," he read, his voice barely a whisper, "is held in perpetuity by the primary stakeholder of Carter Logistics." He stopped shaking his head. "Carter Logistics. That is a global shipping conglomerate. They do not do residential real estate. What does this have to do with you? You share a name, that is all." "It is a coincidence." Moses leaned in closer, his shadow falling over Gavin. "There are no coincidences in my world, Gavin. Only plans. 30 years ago, I founded Carter Logistics. I built it from a single truck and a rented warehouse while you were still learning how to tie your shoes. I stepped away from the public eye a long time ago to see what my family would become if they thought the well had run dry. I wanted to see if the values I tried to teach you, respect, hard work, integrity, would survive without the influence of my checkbook." Gavin backed away, hitting the wall. No, that is impossible. You have been working the night shift at the gate for 5 years. You live in a studio apartment. You wear the same shoes every day." I was watching. Moses set his eyes hard as flint. "I was watching how you treated the waiter when you thought no one was looking. I was watching how you spoke to the cleaning staff. And most importantly, I was watching how you treated a father who you thought had nothing left to give you. You failed the test, Gavin. Every single day for 5 years you chose arrogance over blood. You chose greed over gratitude. But Moses was not finished. The mismatch of power was about to become a total collapse." He turned another page in the folder. "Now let us talk about your career, Gavin. You are very proud of your position at Vanguard Real Estate, are you not? You love to tell everyone how you earned that vice presidency through your own brilliance." Gavin straightened his tie, a final pathetic attempt to regain his dignity. "I did. I closed the Highland deal." "Closed the Highland. I brought in the offshore investors." Moses smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You closed the Highland deal because the owner of the land was instructed to accept your bid. And those offshore investors, they are subsidiaries of Carter Logistics. I built a glass cage for you to play in, Gavin. I wanted to see if you would use your position to build something real, or if you would just use it to bully people." Moses took a step closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that cut through the room like a blade. "Vanguard Real Estate is a fine company, but it is not an independent one. It is owned by the Heritage Trust, and I own 51% of the shares in that trust." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence so heavy it felt like it was crushing the air out of the room. Gavin's face went from red to a ghostly, sickly white. His mouth hung open, but no sound came out. The realization was washing over him like a tidal wave. For 5 years, he had spent every holiday, every family dinner, and every chance encounter insulting, mocking, and belittling the man who was literally signing his paychecks. He had called his boss a loser. He had told the man who owned his entire professional life that he was a drain on society. Moses picked up the folder, his movements precise and calm. You told me earlier today that I should be grateful you even allowed me to sit at the table. You told me that I was a relic of the past that needed to be cleared away for the new generation. Well, Gavin, the past is catching up to you. I am not your subordinate, Moses said, standing tall, the authority of a titan finally radiating from him. I am not your driver. I am not your security guard. I am the chairman of the board. And as of 5 minutes ago, when I sent a single text message to the board of directors, your employment at Vanguard has been terminated for cause. Gavin slumped to his knees, his hands covering his face. The folders and papers scattered around him like the debris of a fallen empire. He had spent years building a house of cards on a foundation of lies and cruelty, and his father had just blown it all down with a single breath of truth. Moses looked down at his son, not with hatred, but with a profound, weary sadness. You thought money was the only thing that gave a man value. You thought that because I had no suit and no title, I had no power. You forgot that the man who built the mountain always knows where the loose stones are. The rest of the family stood in the shadows, terrified to speak, terrified to move. They realized that the world they thought they lived in, a world where they were the masters and Moses was the servant, had never existed. They were all living in a house he had built, eating food he had provided, and breathing air he had paid for. Moses turned toward the door, his footsteps firm on the floor. I am going back to my house now, he said without looking back. Not the studio apartment, the estate on the hill, the one you told me I would never be good enough to even clean. Tomorrow my lawyers will contact you about the repayment of the loans I secretly facilitated for your lifestyle. Since you are so talented and brilliant, I am sure you will have no trouble finding a way to pay me back. As Moses walked out into the cool night air, the sound of Gavin's sobbing began to fill the room. It was the sound of a man who had lost everything, not because it was stolen from him, but because he had never truly earned it. Moses didn't feel joy in the victory. He felt the peace of a man who had finally set the record straight. He had spent years being the underestimated man, and in the end he didn't need to raise his voice to win. He only had to reveal the truth. The order was restored. The pride was gone, and for the first time in 5 years, Moses Carter felt like he could finally breathe. The cold click of handcuffs was the final sound marking the collapse of an empire built on lies. Gavin no longer screamed. He walked slumped between 2 police officers, his shoulders that once carried such arrogance now bowed under the weight of 5 years of mistakes. Moses Carter stood there, hands deep in the pockets of his old jacket, his gaze calm, but carrying a profound sadness. He did not watch his son until the police car door slammed shut. Justice does not always bring joy. Sometimes it only brings a bitter sort of peace. The days that followed were a series of events cleaning up the debris left by the storm. Gavin faced a long list of heavy charges, from financial fraud and property theft to elder abuse. The evidence Moses had silently gathered during his time as a security guard became the final blow. There was no mercy for a man who had intentionally pushed his own father to the brink. In court, Gavin tried to seek help from old friends and partners he once praised, but they all turned their backs. In the world of numbers, the fallen have no friends. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison and ordered to repay every cent embezzled from the family trust. At the same time, the doctor who helped Gavin forge Moses's medical records did not escape the reach of the law. The medical board acted quickly after receiving evidence of the fraud. His license was revoked permanently, and he faced criminal charges for conspiracy to commit fraud. His luxurious office was sealed, and the reputation he had built over decades vanished in a single night. It was the price for selling his professional ethics for dirty money. As for Keisha, her life changed completely. Immediately after the truth about Moses was revealed and Gavin was arrested, she filed for divorce. It was not a decision made out of morality, but out of survival. She realized the man she once leaned on was actually just an empty shadow living off her father's mercy. However, Moses did not give her easy financial relief. When Keisha came to see him with tears of regret and hope for a large allowance, Moses gave her a key. But it was not the key to a luxury apartment or a new car. It was the key to an old warehouse on the outskirts of the city belonging to Carter Logistics. Moses told her firmly that if she wanted to live, she had to learn how to work. He did not give money, but he gave her a job. Keisha started at the lowest position, managing dusty crates and learning to coordinate transport schedules. The first days were terrible for a woman used to parties and shopping. The blisters on her hands and the exhaustion every night were the first real lessons on the value of money. Moses visited the warehouse often, not to help but to observe. He taught her how to read manifests and how to manage people with respect instead of power. Gradually, the look in Keisha's eyes changed from panic to a new confidence, a light growing from her own hard work. After everything, everyone thought Moses would return to the grand mansion where he truly belonged. But he made a decision that surprised them all. He cleaned up the small annex where he had lived as a security guard and decided to settle there permanently. He donated the large mansion to a charity that supported abandoned elderly people, keeping only a small garden and the quiet he had long craved. Every morning Moses still wakes up early, brews a pot of tea, and watches the sun rise behind the city skyline. He no longer wears the security uniform, but his habit of observing the world remains unchanged. The neighbors now look at him with a completely different attitude. There is no more contempt, no more whispers about a poor old man. They see in him a symbol of inner strength and infinite patience. They greet him with sincere respect, and sometimes the children in the neighborhood still run to him to fix their broken toys. Moses realized that a man's value does not lie in the size of the house he lives in or the number of shares he holds. It lies in the ability to maintain oneself in the middle of a storm and the grace to fix what is broken, whether it is a machine or a person. He no longer feels lonely in his small house. On the contrary, he feels wealthier than ever because he is surrounded by real relationships built on truth and respect. The story of the security guard Moses Carter became a legend in the business world and the small corners of the city. People told each other about a man who used silence to answer insults, used wisdom to face cunning, and used love to transform lost souls. Moses smiled thinking about Gavin in prison, believing that one day when his son came out, he would understand why his father chose to live this way. His punishment was never intended to destroy, but always to rebuild a new person from the ruins of a giant ego. That evening, Moses sat in his garden listening to the crickets and enjoying the cool breeze. The world outside was still busy with races for power and money, but in this small corner order was restored. He took out his old notebook and crossed out the last line of his plan. The work was finished. The aftermath was cleared. Moses leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and fell into the most peaceful sleep he had in years. He was no longer a ghost in his own family. He was the master of his destiny, a man who proved that dignity is the only thing no one can take away if we do not give it up ourselves. The small house glowed with warm light in the dark night like a lighthouse of truth and perseverance. And wherever Moses was, whatever clothes he wore, everyone knew that inside that simple shell was the heart of an uncrowned king who taught us all a valuable lesson about the power of integrity. All conflict had passed, leaving only the calm of a soul that found its harbor after long days at sea. Moses Carter had won not with weapons, but with his quiet yet powerful life. The cold click of the handcuffs locking onto Gavin's wrists was the final period at the end of a long story built on lies and blind ambition. He no longer had the strength to scream or point fingers at anyone else. His shoulders, which once carried the weight of $1,000 suits, now sagged and trembled in total humiliation. As the police led him out of the mansion, Gavin saw his own reflection in the window glass, a pathetic failure heading toward a gray police van. It was the price he had to pay for disregarding blood ties and selling his soul for fleeting numbers on a computer screen. The trial that took place shortly after was a crushing blow to what remained of his arrogance. With the undeniable evidence Moses had painstakingly gathered, from secret recordings of private conversations to suspicious bank statements, Gavin had no way out. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison for attempted murder, property fraud, and embezzlement. The day he entered his cell, the only thing he brought with him was late regret and the coldness of 4 concrete walls. No more lavish parties, no more flattery, only him and his broken conscience in the darkness of imprisonment. Meanwhile, the doctor who had assisted Gavin also faced the rightful punishment of the law. The reputation he had built over decades vanished in a single night. The medical board officially revoked his license forever, and a prison sentence awaited him for conspiracy and forging medical records. As investigators sealed his luxurious clinic, he could only bury his head in his hands, realizing that no amount of bribe money was large enough to buy back his lost honor and career. Greed had turned an educated man into a criminal shunned by society. The collapse of Gavin also brought a major turning point in Keisha's life. The divorce happened quickly, leaving her with a vast void and extreme anxiety about the future. Keisha had lived like a parasitic vine, only knowing how to rely on money and the blind protection of others. But Moses, with the stern love of a father, decided not to let his daughter sink deeper into weakness. He did not give her a single penny from the trust fund or inheritance. Instead, he took her to an old warehouse on the outskirts of the city, the difficult origin of Carter Logistics. Moses demanded that Keisha start working from the lowest position as a warehouse clerk. The first days were a torture for her. Hands that were only used to holding wine glasses and designer handbags now had to touch dust-heavy crates and complex shipping invoices. Keisha cried a lot. She blamed her father for being so heartless, for letting her live in such hardship and fatigue. But Moses only stood at a distance, silently watching his daughter through old windows. He wanted her to understand that a person's value is created through honest labor, not from the luxury items she used to cover her internal emptiness. Gradually, tears gave way to the sweat of effort. Keisha began to learn how to manage the warehouse, how to coordinate truck schedules, and how to communicate with workers with sincerity. She realized that life had many more meaningful things than chasing after hollow fame. Moses began to directly teach her about management business ethics, and most importantly, how to perceive the true value of a person. Keisha's change did not happen overnight, but it was a change from the very roots. Her eyes no longer held that superficial look. Instead, they showed the determination and confidence of a woman who had started to stand on her own 2 feet. Once everything had stabilized, Moses made a decision that surprised everyone, even his closest partners. He did not move into the magnificent mansion where Gavin had tried to seize control by any means. Instead, he quietly packed his things and moved back to the small annex next to the security booth where he had lived for the past 5 years in hiding. To Moses, luxury was never the ultimate goal or the measure of his success. He loved the stillness of this small room where he could hear the wind blowing through the trees every night and see the simple, honest rhythm of the world around him. The annex was no longer a symbol of hiding, it was a symbol of a resilient spirit that had weathered the storm. Moses no longer wore the security uniform, but he maintained the habit of waking up early, brewing a pot of tea, and reading the newspaper in the old chair on the porch. Now, no one in the neighborhood or the corporation dared to look down on that old man anymore. Every time they passed by, neighbors bowed to him with the most sincere respect, not because of the massive fortune he owned, but because of the noble character he had shown. The employees of Carter Logistics, when they came to report work at this annex, all noticed a majestic strength emanating from the calm and wisdom of a man who understood the ways of the world. Moses felt his heart more peaceful than ever. He had cleaned up the remnants of the past, straightened out the crooked seeds in the family, and affirmed his position through wisdom and patience. He did not need flashy titles or loud praise to prove who he was. Just the peace in his soul and the genuine respect of those around him were the greatest rewards for a life full of storms. The silence around him now was not loneliness, but the freedom of a great man who had understood all the joys and sorrows of life and found a peaceful harbor for himself. Every evening Moses often sat alone under the warm yellow light of the annex. He looked up at the night sky, feeling a strong connection to the core values he had spent his life preserving. The war with Gavin was not to destroy a son-in-law, but to protect family honor and teach the next generation a lesson about truth. He knew that Keisha's path ahead was still long, and Gavin in prison also needed many years to truly repent. But at least he had sown the seeds of truth and integrity into the land that was once parched by greed. Moses Carter, the man who was once looked down upon like an old item in a security uniform, was now the sturdiest pillar for everything he loved. His presence in that small annex was like a gentle but firm reminder that a person's dignity does not lie in what they hold in their hands, but in how they face adversity and how they keep the kindness in their hearts. As night fell, Moses smiled a satisfied smile of a man who had conquered himself, conquered betrayal, and successfully protected the most sacred values of a man of character. All the aftermath was cleared, leaving a fresh space for better new beginnings. 1 year has passed since the storm that nearly tore the Carter family apart, and the dust has finally settled into a new and steady rhythm. The seasons have turned from the cold bitterness of that fateful winter to the warm golden promise of a late summer afternoon. At the outskirts of the city, where the massive trucks of Carter Logistics once felt like a burden of a past life, Keisha now stands with a clipboard in hand and a smudge of grease on her cheek. She is no longer the woman who lived for the next shopping trip or the approval of a hollow man. She is focused, and her eyes are sharp with the clarity of someone who has earned her place in the world. The warehouse is loud and humming with the sound of progress. Forklifts move with precision, and the staff no longer look at Keisha with pity or resentment. They look at her with respect because they saw her start from the bottom. They saw her sweep the floors and struggle with the inventory logs until her fingers were sore. They saw her face the harsh reality of honest labor without running back to her father for an easy out. Moses had been right to send her here. The warehouse was not a punishment, it was a forge. It was the place where the spoiled daughter died and a capable leader was born. She has learned that every dollar has a story of sweat behind it, and every shipment is a promise kept. Keisha checks the final manifest for the evening and nods to the warehouse manager. She looks at the clock and realizes it is time to visit the one person who made all of this possible. As she drives toward the estate, she no longer feels the anxiety of a child seeking a handout. She feels the pride of a partner coming home. She remembers the days when she thought her father was a failure because he sat in a small booth wearing a polyester uniform. Now she understands that the man in that booth was the only thing standing between her and a life of total ruin. At the small annex next to the security booth, the air is quiet and smells of blooming jasmine and freshly cut grass. Moses Carter sits in his favorite wooden chair on the porch. He is not wearing a suit or a uniform. He wears a simple linen shirt and a pair of trousers that have seen many years of use. In his hand is a glass of iced tea, the ice cubes clinking softly against the glass. He watches the sunset paint the sky in shades of violet and orange, but his gaze occasionally drifts upward to the small blinking light of the security camera mounted above the gate. That camera had been his only friend when the world thought he was nothing. It had been the silent witness to the whispers of betrayal and the hands that reached for things they did not own. Moses looks at the lens and smiles a small, tired but satisfied smile. People often think that technology is cold and unfeeling, but to him that camera was the instrument of truth. It was the eye that never blinked even when his own heart wanted to look away from the painful reality of a son's treachery. It saved his life not just physically but spiritually. It allowed him to see the world as it truly was, not as he hoped it would be. Moses takes a slow sip of his tea and listens to the sound of Keisha's car pulling into the drive. He does not get up right away. He savors the moment of peace. He reflects on the journey that brought him back to this porch. He realizes that for a long time he had measured his success by the height of his office buildings and the size of his bank accounts. He had thought that providing for his family meant giving them everything they wanted without asking for anything in return. He had been wrong. That kind of generosity had only fed the monsters of entitlement and greed. The true legacy he is leaving behind is not the millions of dollars tied up in trusts or the vast shipping empire. His true legacy is the strength he found to stand up for himself when he was at his lowest. It is the lesson he taught Keisha about the value of self-respect. It is the boundary he drew against the darkness that had consumed Gavin. He realizes that the greatest wealth a man can possess is not money, but the unwavering ability to protect his own dignity and the courage to see the truth, even when it wears the familiar face of a loved one. He has learned that you cannot truly love someone if you allow them to destroy you. Gavin is gone lost to the silence of a prison cell and the weight of his own choices. The doctor who sold his soul for a bribe is a forgotten shadow. The estate is no longer a monument to greed, but a sanctuary of quiet strength. Moses has chosen to stay in this small annex because here he is not a chairman or a titan. Here he is simply a man who knows exactly who he is. He does not need the grand halls of the mansion to feel big. The small porch and the cooling tea are enough. He has found that the less he owns, the more he actually possesses. As Keisha walks up the steps and sits on the edge of the porch beside him, they don't need to say much. The silence between them is comfortable and filled with the understanding of two people who have survived a war. She tells him about the day's shipments, and he listens with the pride of a mentor. He sees the transformation in her and knows that the Carter name is finally in safe hands. She is no longer just his daughter, she is his legacy. Moses looks out at the horizon one last time before the light fades completely. He feels a profound sense of closure. He has navigated the most difficult waters of his life and reached the shore. He has proven that the quiet builders of the world are the ones who hold the foundation together. He is the aging guardian who refused to be cleared away, and in doing so he saved the very soul of his family. In a world obsessed with appearances, the gravest mistake one can make is to confuse silence with weakness and humility with poverty. True power does not need to roar, it watches, it waits, and it strikes only when necessary. We often overlook the quiet builders, the aging guardians of our history, assuming their time has passed, only to discover too late that they hold the keys to the very foundation we stand upon. Dignity is not given. It is a fortress built over a lifetime, and woe to the fool who tries to tear it down. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of the strength we carry within, please share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated by those closest to you? And how did you find the strength to stand tall? Don't forget to like and subscribe to Dung Chuyen Dan Ong for more stories about the hidden strength and silent wisdom of men. Your support helps us tell the truths that matter. See you in the next story.